Now, here's where you gotta be careful though, Lisa, right? Narcissistic people, for their lack of empathy, lack of self-awareness, lack of regard for others, have an uncanny ability to recognize when someone's playing them. You might actually see an uptick in rage, and their manipulations may become more cruel. It's almost like, you think you're getting away easy? Oh, hell no.
What actual cruel and manipulative tactics would a narcissist start to use when they feel like they're losing control of you?
So a lot of things. This relationship works if you kind of give them what they want. And for a lot of folks in a narcissistic relationship, it's this person's manipulating you. They're gaslighting you. You're confused. They say terrible things to you, so you react. It's a very normal reaction. As soon as you react or you get frothed up or you show strong emotion, you gave them exactly what they wanted, right? And so as you try to disengage, not fall for the manipulation, understand what it is you're dealing with. If they sense they're losing control of you, like you said, you might actually see an uptick in rage, right? That their manipulations may become more cruel. It's almost like, you think you're getting away easy? Oh, hell no. I'm going to say things that are even worse. I'm going to put you in even more problematic positions. Now, obviously, this is on a continuum. In a milder relationship where you may not be, I don't know, financially dependent or something like that, it may be things like classical one. If you really do hold your ground against a narcissistic person, don't engage, you'll get a lot of, oh, so what's this? Are we in therapy now? Did your therapist teach you to do this? So it'll be very contemptuous, very dismissive, mockery. It'll be sheer mockery, which is very unpleasant to deal with, and it takes a toll on you over time. In some cases, they will attack things that matter to you. They will, your kids, your livelihood, your appearance, any of those things. To them, it's almost no holds barred because they're throwing the Hail Mary pass. They're going to sort of pull you back in. In some cases, they'll beat you to the punch and say, well, if you don't want to spend time with me, they'll step away. Now, you might think, well, that sounds great. A lot of people out there have abandonment issues, and all they want is for this relationship to work more normally, or they may not want to lose the person, but when the narcissistic person sort of does an about face and says, I'm out of here, like, I don't need this. I don't know who this is, but I don't need this. And some people say, ooh, I don't know that I wanted them fully to go away. So abandonment is almost this big card that narcissistic people will play. You might think of the silent treatment, and they don't play when it comes to silent treatment. They can go weeks. I do remember working with a few clients where they said, week 6 of silent treatment, living with someone, hasn't said a word to me. Every so often they'll do the passive aggressive play of, hey, Billy, could you tell your mom to pass the potatoes? Like that kind of passive aggressive stuff. But if there is no third parties in the home, it is all silent treatment. Maybe some things handled in writing, maybe, but maybe not even that. And you got to have nerves of steel to be able to handle that. If people say that it makes them feel sick, and they'll say, I don't know what made me sicker, dealing with their reaction to me finally like pulling back my supply, or having to just put up with their shenanigans and give in to it. And the point is, no path is easy in these relationships. So all of those things can happen.
Oh, where do we start, Cal? So if they're using that then as a manipulation tactic, are they just trying to make it worse than it already is? Like, what's the thought process that's actually going on behind that?
Too many people give people with this personality style too much, I don't want to say credit, or they're assuming there's an intention and a motivation there that it's not. Their motivation is to maintain the ground rules of a relationship that works for them, right? And that's usually that they're in a dominant position. So if anything that's inconveniencing them, they don't like that, right? It's like you got a window open in your house and you're cold, so you go close the window. It's that simple. You don't sit there and try to negotiate with the window. You go and shut the damn window. So for a narcissistic person, if you sort of change ground rules that work for them, and that's usually, again, you're pulling back supply, they've lost that thing they want, which is dominance and control. So at one level, they're reacting to that, right? They don't like that. And that sort of, it brings up shame, insecurity through shame, which is because their insecurity is being pinged. They're losing control. They don't want that. So that will often lead to a lot of the reactivity. But every gambit for a narcissistic person is to maintain control or to keep getting supply. It's pretty simple. It's almost like a rat. They just want to eat. So if you think of it as it's just about supply and control, then you kind of know what motivates them. It's not personal. I think it feels personal and it hurts you. My saying it's not personal is not me saying it doesn't hurt you, but it's all about this internal process they're having about, I must be in control, but they're not aware of it. This is not I got to get back in control. It's like, no, I don't like how this feels. And if I don't like how things feel, I lash out, rather than a healthy person reflecting and saying, well, something changed here. What don't I like about that?
There is something, as you were laying it out, that feels very tactical, right? They're trying this. But to your point, it's not deliberate. So are they just throwing things and seeing what sticks? Like really figuring out what's the thing that's going to irritate or really get that person back or stop them from having the power?
They're tantruming. So you ask a 3-year-old why they tantrum. I'd be curious to see what answer you get back. Right? I mean, if you've ever tried it, even the 3-year-old doesn't even, at some point, they're just sort of out of control, right? They wanted something initially. Maybe they wanted an extra cookie, right? And the mother's like, no, you got one, and one is for dessert and too much. It's not good for you. And then at some point, it was about the cookie. Basically, the child wanted something and they were thwarted. They're totally out of control. And probably 10 minutes in the tantrum, they've forgotten about the cookie. And I think even a 3-year-old might be better at saying, just sad and mad, or they'll find a word. But for the narcissistic person, a lot of this is tantruming. And then there is that sense of, again, everything that's happening for a narcissistic individual is unconscious. Okay? It's these tectonic plates. It's almost like an earthquake. The earthquake doesn't say, yo, world, about to start shaking your stuff up. Sorry, better get ready. It's not, it's just things are moving in these tiny ways. For the narcissistic person, what's happening under them is that there are these unconscious processes. Above all else, it's the sense of shame if their inadequacy or their insecure or their sort of flawed parts are seen. They have to remain grandiose. They have to be perfect. And if they're not, something terrible will happen. That's the psychology of it, right? So anytime anything pops up in them, they feel a little uncomfortable. It's like almost like a rumbling in their tummy. They're like, don't like this feeling, rage, control, dominate. As long as they do those things, it makes them comfortable. So what they've learned over a lifetime is, I don't feel comfortable. No, you're gonna pay for it. And because they don't have empathy, or they lack empathy, or it's variable empathy, they're not thinking of, I better not scream at that person because it might hurt them. So that part of the processing is cut out of the loop. It's, I don't feel good. It's the 3-year-old.
So how then do you respond to things like that? Because as you lay out really originally, right, there's all these different types of effects of the way that they're going to approach you or respond to you when they're feeling out of control. I had actually heard you say in a video where you said, sometimes you want to express your emotions to that person, but then the narcissist doesn't like you showing emotion. But then when you don't show emotion, the narcissist doesn't like you to show emotion.
Right. So again, the show of emotion that works for them, I should say, is the show of emotion that allows them to feel in control and dominant. So let's say you're crying in front of the narcissistic person, sharing your sadness because you found out that they had betrayed you, they'd had an affair, or they'd have an inappropriate relationship, right? The narcissistic person knows what bad behavior is. They know that being a cheater means you're not a good guy. So their vision of themselves is as a great guy, right? And they did what they wanted to do because it felt good at the time to get their supply and validation, but now it's got them in a bit of hot water. People are going to think they're bad. Well, they ain't going to have that, right? So somebody crying at a time like that, they don't get power from that. They feel shame because they're the reason that person is crying. And they know that. But instead of saying, I am so sorry, and taking ownership and taking responsibility, more shame, they don't do that. They get angry at the person for showing the emotion because they're angry at the thing that brought up this bad feeling. Does that make sense? You made me feel bad by feeling bad about the bad thing I did. I know that sounds like a big circle, but that's what they're upset about. So that emotion they don't like. They like the emotion when they bring up something and I can't believe it, and they're calm. Because a calm person always looks like the one in control. So when they get someone to and they're saying, like, I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about this, then they're in the driver's seat. That's the kind of emotion they do like. Anything that puts them in a position of dominance, power, control, they like that. You crying because they hurt you, they don't like that. Different kinds of emotion.
Yeah. So is that why I've heard you also say, like, they'll call you, too sensitive, too dramatic, too over the top, use all these words to shame your emotion, which can be very valid. But that also, in those moments, I think it dismisses us, that, or not even dismisses us, it can make you second guess. Am I being too sensitive? Is this just me? So even though you know you're in this dynamic with that person, they're going to use these certain ways to manipulate you. How do you start to know? And maybe this is a bit of a trick question, but how do you know that it isn't you?
Because all the work we do to help someone, or I guide people to do when they're healing from these relationships, has to be on themselves. The narcissistic person is a side issue to me. They're the stimulus, they're the catalyst, right? They're not even that important. It's a person doing the deep dive into themselves. You need to know who you are, right? And be able to be self-reflective. So, and understand what the sort of spectrum of normal responses are. And it's a pretty wide spectrum of what constitutes normal. But it's also about knowing your history. That sometimes disproportionate, if you will, and I put that in quotes, responses to something can have origins in trauma. They can have origins in self-protection from early experiences, right? And it may be that their reaction, it is too much. It is too much for the situation. And for the person to say, yep, I see, I get it. And they'll say, that was probably too much. I also, though, understand why I was reacting like that. And they're able to see it more holistically, right? Because at those times when we have that sort of understanding of self, we're almost prepared on the front end when we go into a situation like that, saying, okay, this is not going to be easy for me. This is going to bring up a lot for me. So I either have to give myself permission to step out of it for a second, excuse myself, maybe splash some cold water on my face, train myself to breathe through it, and understand I probably won't get it just right, and be self-forgiving to myself, but that none of us are robots. No one's ever going to respond perfectly in every situation. To do the deeper dive, what was happening for me? What was driving me? What was I responding to? And as you do that, it's about knowing yourself and normalizing sort of what was happening for you. And you may have said, oh, that probably was too much, but now that I get it, I'm not going to doubt and blame myself. But I might need to check myself next time.
And so how do you check yourself in those moments, though, right? Because if you've been in a narcissistic relationship where that person has just year after year after year chipped away at you and telling you that you're no good, telling you that you don't have value, telling you that you're useless, how do you start to really know your worth in that situation, so that if they're trying to bring you down, if they're trying to either gaslight you or really just manipulate you into believing that you are no good so that you don't leave, how can you keep going back to a base that maybe you haven't developed?
So here's where it gets tricky. In some ways you have to know some decent things about yourself. And it may not be that somebody's walking around saying, I am great, I'm wonderful, but rather, I'm resilient. I've managed to keep it together in this relationship. Despite all the adversities I've had, I still get up in the morning. Like, everyone has strengths, right? Understanding some of that. But here's where we're going to use your tactics word again, right? This is where the person who's dealing with the narcissistic person needs tactics, right? If you're being gaslighted, if you're being raged at by somebody who you've seen over time, consistently this has been their pattern, not engaging is the only path. And it's no longer that I'm good, I'm great, I'm nothing. It's the tactic here is to not engage with this person. So, and it is going to take a toll on you to be screamed at, to hear things that matter to you be shouted at, to be told you're this, you're that. But it's going to radical acceptance. Like, this is coming out of the body of a person, or the head of a person, or the mind of a person who doesn't have a strong sense of self, who doesn't know how to regulate. You're not signing off on it, you're not agreeing with it, but you're not engaging with it. That's the piece. It's not that you're sitting and taking it, but you're almost mildly dissociating at those times. Like, if there's no way out, it's you know what you're dealing with. It's really that, and not, and again, doing whatever you can do inside of yourself, whether it's breathing. Some people have mantras, some people have prayers. Some people will study a room. They'll be like, if you were doing that to me now, I might find myself lost in sort of, let me describe this room that's around me. Oh, there's white flowers over there, and they're in the shape of the tree I have. Like they get lost in the environment because what's coming at you is nonsense, right? And then you say, okay, okay. And then you just go. Like you're listening to something absurd. That's only going to make, if the narcissist is going off on you and you stay calm like that, that volume is going to go up and up and up. Now, obviously, as I always say on this channel, I am not talking about cases where you're escalating to physical violence. That's an entirely different conversation. You're focused on safety, the whole get the F out of there, like anything you can do to stay safe. That's a different conversation. I'm not even touching that here. I'm talking about someone who's screaming, yelling, screaming, getting so agitated that you're just staying as calm, and you're really figuring out, how am I going to get myself out of this situation? They may even trail you out of the door and keep yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming, but it's the not engaging it that is so important.
And so don't even say, yes, you're right, like even just to like shut it down?
Depends on what you're trying to do. So it's just funny, I just shot a video about that this morning, so it's very top of mind for me. And the video was really about this idea of how people feel kind of gross when they give in. Right? When they say, you're right. And I say, it's survival, right? Would you ever get mad at someone who might break a window to get into a place to seek shelter to survive? No, we wouldn't. That's survival. So sometimes giving in is the way that you're surviving, in the sense of it's low stakes. They're going on like, you were there. Remember 20 years ago, you were there. You were at that bar. What difference? Okay, you were never at that bar, but you could say, sure. Okay. I just had this happen the other day. Someone's like, this is the case. I'm like, all right, well, I mean, okay, sure, I could see that. And that kind of got the person, well, what are they going to say? You don't believe me enough? I knew it wasn't true. And I think part of it is the conviction within yourself that I know this isn't true, but I also know I'm giving in on this because I got to keep the trains running. So an interesting analogy I'd once learned from a client who was dealing with a very dysregulated narcissistic partner. And what she had said was, she said, it's about time for me. And if I get into it with this person, if I try to set a limit, if I fight back, if I tell them their behavior is not okay, I could lose not only maybe 6 to 8 hours or the whole weekend. So I have to do a quick calculation. Do I want to lose a weekend? Do I want to lose 8 hours? Do I want to lose 2 weeks of tantruming about this? Nah. So I'll answer any way this person wants to hear it. Again, assuming this isn't going to put her in harm's way or she wasn't agreeing to something she doesn't want. But, it was this particular case, it was the husband was trying to get the wife to admit that she is was overly indulgent of one of their kids. And she's like, you're right. I spoil him. Like I am too indulgent. You're absolutely right. She wasn't, and she wasn't going to change it. But that was like, he's like, yeah, I know. It's like, it's good that you finally see it. Ugh. And she's like, I know. I'm terrible with him. I got to get that together. Now, here's where you got to be careful though, Lisa, right? Narcissistic people, for their lack of empathy, lack of self-awareness, lack of regard for others, have an uncanny ability to recognize when someone's playing them. They pick up the little tone and voice, and they feel like you're patronizing them, right? So you've got to toe a line where, it's the Academy Award kind of performance sort of thing, where you have to say, you're right. I am. You can't be like, I know, you're right. I'm really indulgent. It has to be like, you're right. Yeah, I am pretty indulgent. I'll I got to get on that. I got to work on that. And so you kind of have to sound like a little like scattered and all this, but all of that over time, the more times in our life we are inauthentic, the greater a toll it takes on us. You cannot be authentic in a narcissistic relationship. So the more time you spend with them, the less authentic you can be, the more of a toll it's taking on your mental health. So at a minimum, you need to find places in your life where you can bring your true self, where you can be authentic. But a lot of people feel like, I feel bad. I feel like I'm my own gaslighter. I feel like they're winning. I said, they're not winning. They're walking around. They're them. You would not want to be them. It is a terrible, terrible life. Even though it seems like they got it all figured out, they really do. They constantly feel like they're under siege, narcissistic people. It's a terrible way to live. So it's not that they're winning, it's that you're making a decision to say, I don't want to lose 6 hours. You won, you got the 6 hours back.
Oh God, I love that framing. And literally you took the words out of my mouth that I was going to ask. That you can't necessarily be sarcastic about it, I assume.
No,
Because if they
God,
pick
no.
up on that.
Oh Lord. Then it's yeah, they're, how dare you talk down to me, man. So you, again, it is performance, tactical performance. And it's hard. I mean, they it's almost like they can, even if you were rolling your eyes inside your head, they can pick up on that.
And so I've also heard you talk about one of the tactics they do is try to make you feel badly about yourself.
Yeah.
Explain that to me. How do they actually do that? And then what is the result of them doing that?
So it's give you a classical example. Person goes up to a narcissistic person in their life, partner, whomever, and says, hey, you're not going to believe it. Like they're jumping me up to the promotion. I am super excited. Like I didn't think I'd get it, but I've been putting in the extra hours. I can't, I'm so excited. And the narcissistic person will say, you sure you got this? Like, that was quick. Like, really? Can you handle that? And remember, you're already in a relationship with somebody who's been manipulating and gaslighting and getting him in. But they'll like, you sure you could do that? Now, someone will say, well, they're just projecting their insecurity. I understand that. But now you're like, ooh, I just got this big promotion. Can I handle this? They'll get those digs in all the time. Or they'll compare you to someone else. Like, you'll make a beautiful dinner and they'll sit down and say, oh, I see what you're trying to compete with my sister. You think you can cook like her? So you've made this amazing dinner, and then it's triangulated into this almost, you're made to look foolish. Or you might do yourself up, fix your hair, dress up, and they'll say, well, what's this? Like, who are you getting ready for? And instead of like, you look lovely. Someone will say, well, just learn how to speak narcissism. They're trying to tell you look nice. No, I'm not doing that. I don't need a Rosetta Stone to be able to get through a damn relationship. And so they're trying to bring you down, right? The more they can do that, the more they can control. So it's digs, it's passive aggressive, it's comparing you to other people. It's a competition. So let's say you work in the same business as them, same industry as them. And you could decide to, excel in your own way. And they're like, what do you think? You're going to catch up to me? And it's very dismissive, very contemptuous. They use their tone a lot, very sneering, very dismissive. So sometimes it's not even what they say, it's how they say it. But this doesn't happen once. This happens over and over and over. Sometimes they'll even do the passive aggressive. You've succeeded in that, and they'll say, oh, little Miss Fancy, what are you going to do? Put that plaque on your wall like a 2-year-old? You got a sticker from your teacher? They'll do that too. So it's all so hurtful. But again, and everyone's like, no, it's because they're insecure. I get that, folks. You're not telling me something I don't know. They have to get the digs in because their shame is coming up.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 Steps to Becoming Confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. So should you tell yourself in those moments, because I'm always trying to play that, the person that's hearing it, the person that maybe recognizes it, but also the person that actually believes it. And so if you're the person that starts to believe it, what are the things that you can start to do? Because you may know it's a manipulation tactic,
right,
but also it still can feel very real, especially if they're pressing on the thing that you really are insecure about.
Couple things. Number one, there's no quick, if a person's gone through a narcissistic relationship for long enough, and especially they grew up with a narcissistic parent, the voice never goes away. And I say this as a survivor at 57 years old, sitting in front of you, I will never believe what I do is good, ever. I look at the draft of my book, which we'll be talking about in the months to come. I'm like, no one's going to read this. I look at my YouTube. No one's going to watch this. I look at everything I do. I'm not very good. And people are like, how do you not see you're doing good work? I'm like, you know what? Let's not even have that conversation. And I've said this in my own therapy. I said to my therapist, let's be clear. I'm never going to get there. And I'm not wasting any more time trying to get there. But what I am going to believe is that I'm going to keep doing work I think is helping people. And when I get the feedback that it's hitting, and it's not even directly from the people, it's my staff saying, yeah, it's working. Here's the numbers. And they're even on to like, we know you don't think you're doing a good job, but the numbers are there. We're doing what we need to do. Bye. So it's that. So my point then becomes is what are the tools you can do? Because all the things we can't do, I do with clients. Number one, you need at least one safe place. You need one person who sees you accurately. So even if you don't fully believe it, because I think people are kidding themselves. If they think, no, I'm going to make this person totally believe in themselves, they'll never talk like that again. Not going to happen. That seed of doubt, it's like a weed in a lawn. You can do whatever, unless you're going to tear up that whole lawn and resod it. There's no equivalent of that for a person. And so you carry it, but then you get plugged into meaning and purpose. You get plugged into great support networks. And you have people tell you, this is good. And they know you don't feel it, but you trust and love them. It's like they're saying it's good and they'd never lie to me. So I have to believe a little of it, right? So I'm telling you that this is not stuff you solve quickly. This is bedrock that goes so deep into the earth you can't imagine. So it's having the alternate sources of information. It's having the people who tell you it's good. It's finding meaning and purpose, because when you're working on stuff that matters to you and you put your head down, you're like, I think this is good. Like, I think it's good that I get to do, not that I even think it's good, but like I get to do what matters to me. But then over time, having the radical acceptance about the narcissistic person means that what's coming out of their mouth is a joke. And you'll forever have some grief that it got to you because you don't fully believe in yourself in other spaces. But at least if you can recognize what they're saying is a joke, it doesn't put a bigger finger on the scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. This is deep and big. And there's no magical way that someone's going to turn it off and say, I'm great.
Thank you for being so transparent about that. It seems like you've used that as empowerment to say, like, this is just who I am. I'll never believe in this. How do you see that as empowerment versus someone else that may see that as giving up or like you've lost faith in yourself?
The meaning and purpose piece, the getting up and finding something that makes your heart sing and doing it. And I have to say, if a person goes through enough narcissistic relationships, your life starts to feel like a Hail Mary pass. I'm like, well, everything else has been taken away from me, so I might as well go for it, right? It does have that kind of, that sort of like, all right. It has that flair. And that's someplace I try to take survivors where I was like, what do you got to lose? Let's go. And they'll say, okay, you're right. What do I have to lose at this point? And sometimes the thing that makes your heart sing isn't a job. It could be a hobby. It could be volunteering. It could be your faith. It could be your children. It could be your pets. It could be something you start that's small. Like if someone might put together a book club. Again, I'm not talking about like people have to go out and write the great American novel or something. Whatever it is, that thing that is yours. And the key is if you have something you love and that you do in your life, never, ever share it with the narcissistic person. Ever. And this is sort of the rule of threes I give people in narcissistic relationships that builds on what we're saying. I always tell them, if you have good news, I don't care if you're still married to this person. I don't care if you still live with them. I don't care if it's your family member. I don't care if it's someone you see every damn day. If something good happens to you, never tell them first. Never. You need a list. Make a list on your phone if you need to. And you have at least 3 people, 4 people, maybe 10 people you share the good news with first. Let them say, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. I love you. This is so great. And you get the la, 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 the happiness that people who care about you give. So A, if you can, never tell the narcissistic person. And B, by the time you tell them, if you have to tell them, you've gotten the good stuff. So when they're dismissive and sneering and are you a 2-year-old and all that, you're like, yeah, now I got to remember who I'm dealing with here. Let it go. But ideally, don't tell them. Same thing with bad news. Something bad happens, demotion at work, lose your job, diagnosis of an illness, whatever. Don't tell the narcissistic person first. A lot of people say, I know I'm going to tell them, oh my God, when they find out I'm sick, you know what's going to happen when they find out you're sick? They're going to abuse you more. You find someone else to tell, same list. Hey, I got this test. I'm a little worried, to the people who can hear it. You'll get a lot of, how can I help? Do you want to talk about it? Then, and only if it's necessary, tell the narcissistic person. So that leaves people saying, I can't tell them the good stuff and I can't tell them the bad stuff. What the hell am I supposed to tell them? I say the indifferent stuff. Like, did you hear those coyotes last night? Or, I can't believe it, they changed the sign on that Starbucks. Or, the lane is closed down on Ventura Boulevard. And that's it. And like, well, that's not a relationship. I said, it was.
Mhm. Why would they abuse you more if you tell them the bad stuff?
Because they're either going to feel like now they may have to step up and do something. They might have to take care of you. They might feel that shame again. I see this a lot with medical stuff. Countless numbers of people who would stick it out in the narcissistic relationship, thought they had radically accepted, they hadn't. And then they get sick, which many people who are staying in these relationships long enough do, the stress really takes a body out. And they'll say, okay, now that I tell them I have, God forbid, cancer, I have a chronic autoimmune condition, whatever, they're going to see there's something real happening. I have to go to the hospital. This is it. They're going to sit by my bed, a hospital bed. And usually the first comment is, oh, what now? You expect me to take you to urgent care? Like, oh, come on. You expect me to sit at chemo with you for 2.5 hours? I'm busy. These are quotes I have witnessed. Okay? So people say they wanted to drop me off at the curb at the emergency room and did. What? I don't like hospitals. I don't like sick people. Really, I'm so busy. Like, this isn't what I signed up for. That's what you'll hear. So for some people, they thought, God, well, maybe when the rubber hits the road, maybe when there's a real need, this person will step up. And the danger of that is they don't make alternative plans. You don't, I mean, you find someone else to take you to that colonoscopy, folks. Do not count on the narcissistic person. Narcissists will then get mad, like, why did you ask your friend to take you? Like, come on, isn't a husband supposed to take you? And say, that's when you could say, you know what, I knew you were so busy this week. And she wanted to, she had to go by there anyhow. You make up your little excuse. The whole thing is a farce. There is no, you know what I'm saying? It is bringing up the level of inauthenticity. But no, they don't like hearing the bad news because they feel like now it's almost as though if they don't help, then they're a bad person. And they don't want to feel like a bad person, but they don't want to help.
So what if then even with the good news, as I assume at some point they're going to hear it, right? Let's say you got a promotion, or let's say something amazing has happened, and you've gone to a party, and let's say you're talking to your friends about it, but they overhear it. Aren't you going to trigger them more because you haven't told them?
Depends on how big the news is, right? Now, like if you've been, I don't know, nominated for a Nobel Prize, you might want to tell them. This is kind of big. But like, I don't know, let's say it's a promotion that was mattered to you, but it's not that much more money or whatever. That's where if your friends are like, oh my gosh, like, did you hear? Like, she's this. And like, how come I didn't know about this? And say, oh my gosh, they exaggerate. They're making such a big deal about it. It's not that big a deal. And you might have to almost downplay what it was because they always feel like they need to be in the know. And right. And so you have to play it carefully. If it's big news, it's the kind of thing that would cause a hubbub or people are going to post it on social media, then get your goodies, get people to, who support you and love you. And then you're like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe la 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 la. And then they'll make a dig. Oh, here we are. We're talking, this is what we're doing. We're talking about you again. But you've already talked with people who have said, we're so proud of you. And then what you're thinking of tactically is like, now I'm out of the woods. I've told them so I have to worry about it now. You just got that out of the way.
God, it's such a, what's the word? Almost like this little like maze, because you think like, okay, they don't want to hear good news, but then surely bad news is going to greet them more warmly towards me. But if they don't even want to hear that, then it kind of puts you back in the foot of like the unexpected. It's, I think, the unknown that also can be quite scary for people, where you think something's about to happen and it doesn't. So if you had to have a knowledge of some sort about when you're in a situation with a narcissist, of when to share, when not to share, how to share, and where to share, is there like oh God, I'm going to say simplistic rule of thumb? I assume it's not going to be a simple thing.
Number one, if it's something that matters to you, like I said, make sure you've sounded it out through other people first, whenever possible, right? If the narcissistic person's next to you and when you find out someone died, you're not going to say, wait, I got to go tell everyone else they died and then I'm going to tell you. I mean, I'm saying like you were away from them when the news came and now, now you've shared it with other people. So one is to turn to your supports first, number one. Number two is read the room. I mean, remember, narcissistic people are interesting. It's not always bad days with them. There are days when they're doing well. You know it. They're whistling a tune and they're having a good day because they got validated. Everything went the way they wanted. They're feeling good for whatever reason they're feeling good. You might be able to step in there a little bit more tentatively and share something. That I think that they might be more able to hear whatever it is I'm sharing with them. A third thing you want to be aware of is, how am I doing today? Can I withstand their having a meltdown and attacking me and dismissing me and being cruel to me or being passive aggressive or whatever they are? Am I up for that before you share something? And this is going to sound gross, what I'm going to say next. Have a bunch of topics already written out in your phone, little things to talk about. You can't talk about controversial political stuff. Can't talk about, have the list prepared, and say, ask them about themselves. That's another thing that helps. I don't even think it's fair to say what you do in a narcissistic relationship is sharing, because sharing represents a back and forth. And you have to be careful. That's why these relationships are so much work. You are having to read the room. You are having to assess where you're at. You're having to assess where they're at. And then and only then are you going to necessarily make the information sort of known.
Yeah, God, it's such a tricky navigation to do in those situations. And like, even if I thought, oh, he's having a good day, I would then start to doubt, well, if you're the one that's bringing bad news, he's really going to come after you for bringing bad news to his good day.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it could very well be that they'll get mad at you. Oh my God, I was having a great day and now you did this to me, blah, blah, blah. So there's no winning at this. And I think that piece of it, of knowing that no matter how careful you are about this, that you still I think the thing is, people think I can get it right. In some ways, their bad reactions are a reminder of it's really not you. I remember a case of somebody who had told me that she was relatively new in the relationship too. It was like 2-3 months, some red flags, whatever. And she said to the guy, she said, oh my gosh, I am so glad you wore that sweater again. I love how it brings out the blue in your eyes. I thought that the first time. He raged at her. And you don't want to know why he raged at her? He raged at her. He said, what do you think? I only have one sweater? What's your point? Like, what are you trying to do? Seriously? Like, you think I'm a bum? He went off.
So even a compliment can be skewed, yeah. Ooh, that's tricky. You've also laid out some things of just don't say this. No matter what circumstances you're in, don't say this. And so one of them is, don't say oh, I hope, don't get mad, but... No. So why, because these are very tactical, and I love getting tactical, because to my last question is that sometimes it can be so nuanced, I'm not even sure how to maneuver. But I really do love how you just lay out, don't say this, do this, because it just gives me more of a prescription to go by. Right. So I'd love to go through a few of them. So the first one is, don't say to someone, don't get mad. Why should you not say that?
I'll tell you this, it's a bad thing to say to anyone. Okay, so even forget the narcissistic people. Never go up to someone and say, don't get mad. Because you're about to tell them something that's going to anger them, and you're telling them don't have an emotion, right? So that's just not going to work. But you may, with a healthier person, be able to say, I am so sorry to have to tell you this, but la 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 la, and then the person can have a reaction. If you're going to give that kind of heavy bad news that's going to make anyone angry to a narcissistic person, I would say either, if you could do it in a place where maybe there's other people that could keep you safe, or make sure no one's drinking, so maybe he doesn't get worked up and agitated, or whatever it may be, but don't ever preface it with that, because it's actually a little bit gaslighty, but it really gets a narcissistic person incensed, because they don't like being told what to do, and you telling them don't get mad is you telling them what to do.
Yeah, that's so true. And when it's kind of like saying to someone, you just need to calm down. No one ever calms down if you tell them to calm down. Never.
And that's it. Narcissistic people tend to tell people to calm down.
Really?
That's a big narcissist line. Huge.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, it's because it's gaslighting. Calm down. You're being too emotional.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, you also say, do not say to them, do you hear yourself? Do you listen to yourself?
Oh God, no. Because they don't, all right? And what you're doing that's indirect communication, right? Do you hear yourself is not, again, it's actually not a healthy way to communicate, but for a narcissistic person, it will spin them out. Because what you're saying is, what's the corollary to that? You sound insane. You sound terrible. You sound racist. You sound something terrible, right? And so now they're going to experience that in a shaming way, and they're definitely going to rage at you.
Yeah. Okay. And then you also say, don't ask them why. Why
never.
they do
That's
things.
the biggest one of all. So when any of us ask someone why, what are we asking really? What we're trying to get at the core of, in general, is their motivation. Why did you go to the store? Why did you ask him that? Why did you take that job? Why did you make chicken for dinner? Okay, you're trying to understand the motivational process that led to a given decision, right? And I mean, I think if we're having a bad day, not all of us love that question, but it's an unpacking question. Now, narcissistic people are almost detached from their motivations for their behavior. They really are, because they have so much unprocessed, unconscious stuff, shame, insecurity, all of that. They're not able to, they don't have that awareness. So they can't answer your question. Then they feel foolish, and then they get angry.
So it's purely because they can't answer it that they feel like they're being trapped by you?
They feel shamed. I don't know why. I don't know why I do this. Why are you even asking me such a stupid question? How about that why? So they'll immediately lash out. So they don't like the why, not just because they don't know what their motivation is, but also because they're oppositional. They don't like being held accountable. So why'd you go to the store? None of your business. Even though they went to go get milk. They just don't like that accountability. There's an inherent oppositionality built into narcissistic people. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me, I don't owe you anything. I don't have to tell you what I'm doing. That's a very big part of that personality style. So when you ask them why, they feel like they shouldn't have to answer that.
Yeah, oh God, that's terrible. What about when they're gaslighting you to the point that you end up gaslighting yourself? So I know one of the common traits, especially when, like, if you're trying to leave, people are just like, oh, but if it could just go back to the way it was. And I've heard you say, like, there is no going back to the way it was, as if there was like the good old days. Right. But not only sometimes, I think, does someone manipulate you by telling you that, I think sometimes we almost like gaslight ourselves by, I understand why we want to believe that there were some good old days, but I think sometimes we trick ourselves into believing, oh yeah, if I just don't rustle any feathers anymore, then we'll go back to the good old days. If I don't call them on this behavior that I've now spotted, we're going to go back to the good old days.
Right. So, so let's talk about a person in a narcissistic relationship who still doesn't know what they're dealing with. They don't quite understand narcissism. Might say, why can't we go back to the beginning? They were texting me all the time and buying me gifts, and we'd go on these vacations and we'd have these long conversations, right? That's more of a euphoric recall process, where a person wants to go back to a time that you'll never really get back to again because they were trying to win you over, kind of draw you into them. Now, when the narcissistic person basically saying, can we go back to the way it was, is before you understood what the hell you were dealing with, right? So before, it was the whole, you were always giving in, you would fall for the gaslighting, you would doubt yourself, you would, again, they got to remain in the position of power and dominance. So when you do set a limit or a boundary or don't engage with them the same way, they basically are saying, it's a dressed up way of saying, I want to go back to, like you said, I want to go back to the time where you weren't giving me such a hard time. So you have this is the paradox of these relationships. You can make one of these relationships work easy. Just give in to everything and give up on your sense of self. And if you do that, this relationship will work. Don't call them out on their behavior. Just put up with it. And it's almost like being in a cult. A cult works if everyone follows the cult leader. It works just fine. So, well, I just have to follow the teachings of the cult leader and I'll be fine, right? And so the problem is, once you see the light, it's pretty hard to go backwards. But then people will blame themselves, saying, well, maybe that's just what I did. I've worked with many clients like this. It could be a parent, it could be a partner, where they're saying, well, I did change the rule book. I did go along, and then all of a sudden I'm no longer going along. And so they don't like that. And I was like, okay, great. That's good. Go back. Do it that way. No, I don't know that. Like, that was dishonest. I'm like, okay. Them's your options. And I think all of these things, Lisa, drive radical acceptance, because they start to say, like, oh, if I do every single thing that they want, then this relationship works. Well, I don't want to be in that relationship. And so, but they'll view it as, look back and say, well, these are the good old days because we weren't fighting as much. Things kind of seemed like they would run more smoothly. I've worked with people who went through difficult divorces and will say, yes, I know in the long run I'll be better without them, but gosh, it was so much easier when I wasn't going to court and I loved our home together. And, the financial comfort gets lost. Like, people will sometimes look at like there was an order to their lives. The work of therapy, the work of healing is you were in something where you were paying the ultimate cost, which was yourself. And is that worth it? And people will often, we can break them out of the hate saying, no, I don't want to go back. But they will look back and say, I did once have a life that had a lot less conflict in it. I did have a life that was a lot more comfortable, that was easier, where I had less social stigma, whatever it is that they lost when they decided to change up the rules. And what gets even harder is if the people around the person who's in the narcissistic relationship don't understand narcissism, and they'll say, well, you're the one who got to be so difficult. You're the one who's like, is it really them? So because they might think the narcissistic person's great. Remember, they're very good at being publicly facing nice and generous and all those things. So other people might say, well, you're the one who's different now. And in fact, the difference now is you're actually understanding what it is you're dealing with.
And are there parts that we just almost like romanticize because we remember in that moment how it maybe felt?
Listen, human beings have a remarkable, by and large, the way we think of memory is we cherry pick the bad stuff, right? We do. We remember bad stuff with greater salience than we do good stuff for no other reason that it protects us, right? If we could remember where all the dangers were from an evolutionary perspective, we would know, don't go down there, there's a danger there, there's a danger there, there's a danger there. We remember that. We remember the plant that had the poisonous berries or made us sick, whatever. Good things are harder, and then there's interesting work out there from people saying part of what we can teach people through meditation is to pull out the good, right? An interesting thing happens. There's a bit of a reversal that can happen for people in narcissistic relationships because there are good things that happen throughout the relationship. And there's the trauma bonded piece of having to justify a person's bad behavior on the basis of their good behavior. So holding on to those good behaviors almost becomes its own form of survival. Because if I can remember these good behaviors, then I can stay in this. And it's not doing you a service because I do recall talking to someone and years they'd say, but we had went out dancing in Miami, but like we had this great time in Miami. But I remember I said, for the number of times you have brought up that night dancing in Miami, one would think you went to Miami every month. Happened one time 25 years ago and this person still talked about it.
Yeah, that's what I mean about the romanticizing. And recently, actually, I got asked the question. It was like, I think on an IG Live. And the question was, I have been verbally abused by my ex and time again, I finally left and now I miss him. What do I do? And the very first thing I said is go check out Dr. Ramani's stuff. But that was very interesting to me, to your point of how so many of us will hold on to the bad. But when it comes to a relationship, for some reason, we do remember that one magical moment or that one way. Because in the question, actually, she was like, he used to say how pretty I was, And so my response was, well, how do you build your validation within yourself so that you're not seeking it from outside sources?
And I'd go deeper than that. I'd say, where do you think this message of prettiness became so important to you? For some people, it might have been like many people have said, I was safest with a certain parent when they thought I was pretty. I was the apple of their eye when I was pretty. Some people say my parent loved me until I got to an awkward stage and then they weren't interested in me because I wasn't pretty anymore. I felt safe because someone thought I was pretty. My identity, my family. So it's more of not even so much how you talk to yourself is why does this hold such weight for you? Because it wouldn't hold weight for me. If somebody told me I'm pretty, I'd be like, that's not even interesting to me. Tell me I'm smart, I might actually turn my head, right? Because that's a characteristic that matters more to me, but the attractiveness piece doesn't, I don't care. That mattered to her, so I'd want to say like that, we've got to pull this thing up from the roots. Because that, and he had that thing, and then that's what the trauma building often builds on, is that one seed of something. It's what we call a correction, right? It's a correction from the past. That's why I remember many times people will say, you know what, this narcissistic person was so financially responsible. All his finances, had investments. It was so, and they said, I came from a family where my parents were ridiculously irresponsible with money. We'd get evicted and all that. So they were drawn to that incredible sense of financial responsibility, but the person was very abusive. But that sense of, in some cases it's pretty, in some cases it's responsibility, in other cases it's piety, like being very faith-based. In some cases it might be being physically strong. Whatever a person, sometimes we're, they say we crave the foods that we crave the foods that have the nutrients we're lacking. I think something similar happens in narcissistic relationships.
Ooh. So is there not really one type of characteristic then a narcissist will look for in a partner? Would be dependent?
I think a narcissistic person, above all else, is looking for supply and status. Those are the things they want, right? Now, supply comes through so many different routes. So somebody might choose supply because they know they could dominate someone easily. So they may choose someone who's like, well, the person's not that fancy or flashy. I'm like, yeah, but they're going along with everything they say. So that's their source of supply. So the supply is a universal. Being in control is a universal. Status is universal. And that status might come from, look at me, I'm the big person in this relationship. Their status. If someone else will pick a very beautiful partner because they want to be seen around town with someone beautiful. Someone else might choose someone of tremendous wealth because there's a status, or went to a certain school, or whatever it is, because that's what they're seeking. But for the narcissistic person, they're looking for those things. They choose their partners on that basis. And once they realize early on, they can get away with stuff. Because if you set a limit with a narcissistic person early in the relationship, they're going to walk. They're not going to be interested.
So would that be one characteristic, someone who doesn't actually set limits?
I would say not even set limits as much as might laugh aside the gaslight, the invalidating comment. And, listen, Matthew Hussey, friend to both of us, him and I have had this conversation. And, Matthew says, and I think it's very wise, he's like, you can't spend the first few dates in a relationship just looking for red flags. You also simply have to be in it. And no one's going to get it right. Like, you can't just be on the edge of your seat saying, nope, yeah, you're not going to be that. It's not like job interview. But it's let's say, in a more simple way, it would be a person, someone's trying to rush sex, okay? They're saying, oh, come on, you're so sexy in your text, babe. Like, I know you want. You're saying, listen, don't step back. Don't touch me like that. Like, oh, come on, you talk a tough game. And they're getting into your space sexually. And you're like, stop, drop me off. I'm out of here. I'm not having sex with you, right? I'm not, and I'm really offended at how you treated me. If it's early on, they might try to hoover you back in. Oh, you misunderstood. If you can really stand your ground and say, I said stop multiple times, you didn't listen, like this didn't feel comfortable, they'll probably say, you're a tease, you're this, you're that, and then it'll be over. And you will not hear from them again. Right? But if you wait in it and saying, okay, well, I'm not going to relent, and then you fall for they apologize, and you're like, okay, well, I guess they see it now. If you could take those early fails as fails, and set a really hard standard then. Some people say, oh, but you're going to let some good ones get away. You know what? It's worth it. There's other fish.
But to be honest, I think if you're setting a boundary and someone doesn't respect your boundary and then you repeat your boundary and they still don't respect it, that's not a good one that you're letting get away.
It's not. But I think the problem is that for many people, they feel guilt when they set boundaries, right? Setting boundaries is fraught with guilt. Who am I? I don't have the right. They were told as a kid, what are you talking boundaries? We're a family. You shouldn't blah, blah, blah. So people get very mixed messages. And so it's hard for them. And if they were to set the boundary and the other person came hat in hand apologizing like, oh, I'm so sorry, you're so gorgeous, I couldn't. Now all of a sudden the message starts getting very confused. And a lot of people feel like, gosh, I'm being really rigid. Like they're apologizing so much. And that's it. Then that person now knows they're going to be able to always play this game with you.
But then, I think that in that situation, if that was me, I would say, okay, maybe that was one time, like give them the grace. And then the second time, the third time, it's a pattern.
Right. And so I think that's, I think the first time is a very hard bar to set, but that person's going to switch tactics. They now know that play didn't work. So they're going to try something new.
Recently, I've heard about people talking about like basically recognizing and identifying your own red flags, and actually found this interesting of like, because you even said, right, well, the narcissist will prey on somebody depending on what they're seeking, right? If they find their own validation in someone that's wealthy, then that's what they're going to go after. But if you're somebody who maybe has been in a relationship with somebody like that, would you suggest then marking down where you maybe went wrong? What were the things that you spotted in hindsight that you could have done differently, and then almost marking them as your own personal red flags?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I think that again, something I've talked about is this idea of there are red flags, and then there are the red flags that are very specific to you, okay? And the red flags, warning signs, call them what you will, the bespoke ones, the ones that are yours, are going to come from your history, how you've gone through the world, how you've been affected by people, your expectations, your beliefs, all of it. And that's why not all are created the same. For one person, texting at the table would be absolutely not, I'm out. For someone else would be like, that's modern times, I do it, it's fine by me. So that's not going to feel like a red flag to them, and that's fine. I mean, I think that they'll say they could text at the table all the days of my life, it'll never bother me. And so that person's registering it differently, right? For some people, anything that even has a whiff of cheating, for example, or betrayal, they're out like immediately. They find out someone's still talking to their ex, they're out, whatever. For other people, that's not so much their thing. So I think that there's definitely that piece of it, that these things that are warning signs are very personal, right? To your point about writing things down, I think it's never a bad idea, because here's the thing. Once a person's been through a narcissistic relationship that's on its last legs, even if they stay with the person, they'll say, these were the signs I saw, right? And some of them are very subtle. And this is where, again, Matthew and I are in tremendous agreement over this, is that a person could drive themselves mad thinking, there was a rest. How did I miss them? I said, this is an easy story to tell backwards. It's almost like, well, I could have told you that character who came up in the first 10 seconds was going to be the killer after you saw the end. I mean, otherwise you just stop watching the damn movie after 10 seconds saying this is the murderer. You have to watch it like, oh, now all makes sense. Of course it makes sense. So it's the same thing. Now you've seen the end of the movie. So all the pieces connect quite nicely. But there's very few people who would say, I should have known this would ended up in a disaster. They sent me a dozen roses. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Right.
I mean, like, that's wacky. Now, I understood now that we have all the other data, the dozen roses made sense. They sent the dozen roses as a way to make up for some weird comment they made. That may not have been clear to you at the time. So again, you have all the data when it's done. So these so-called red flags, some are bigger than others. I think there's a tremendous utility, though, in writing them down. Writing down the things that, when this happened, this made me uncomfortable, this made me uncomfortable, this made me uncomfortable. And as they pile up, you'll definitely see, like, oh, if you did this over God help someone, if they had multiple toxic relationships, and I'd say, this is a mistake I kept doing. Sometimes, Lisa, it's very simple things. People who might have grown up with narcissistic parents who never felt good enough, and they'll say, every time the thing that I never would have thought was a red flag was that this person paid a lot of attention to me. And they said, because they paid attention to me, I was actually missing this other stuff that was setting the toxic groundwork. I missed that they were abrupt with the servers, or I missed that they kind of made some dismissive comments about where my friends lived. And that stuff was unnecessary, but they paid attention to me. This is why sort of knowing ourselves becomes so important, because then we know if a person does this, this is my thing. And when this is happening, my vision might get blurry about that other stuff. That's why we need to know that about what needs we have that are, again, corrections from the past that might make us vulnerable to, again, blurring out some of the other stuff. But also I tell people, you need to write down all the terrible things that happened in the relationship. As gross as that feels, sometimes seeing it in one place, you're like, oh, this is why I need to not go back. Some people, though, say if they do that, they feel terrible about themselves and say, why did I put up with all of this? So it's tricky.
That's true. Yeah, and then I'm just going to add to, if someone gets you a dozen flowers, red roses, like, that's just sometimes a nice gesture.
It's sometimes
and you don't want it to be like, well, they're love bombing me, and well, you can spot it immediately, and now they're gone. Yeah. Like, there's such a fine line, even as we're talking about, like, the flags and stuff, where it's, it can be tricky because sometimes it can actually come from somewhere sweet, kind, and genuine. But if you've had a bad experience, you can interpret that as being a manipulative tactic.
Correct. So where somebody might say, my narcissistic ex sent me roses all the time. Now this person sent me roses. I'll forget it. I'm out. I'll say, whoa. Can we talk about what else has been happening? And I'll say, and they're talking about someone who's been kind, consistent, predictable, warm, respectful. I bet, okay. I think that, they say, Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes, sometimes these things are just what they are. Rose is a rose or whatever. It's not that big a deal. We can sometimes, this is why red flag conversations are so dangerous, because they can put us focus on one thing and we miss the whole context.
Yeah. Talk to me about the Ds, the dark personalities that you've recently been speaking about, where it's, you talk about where it's a personality traits, I believe.
Like the dark triad and dark tetrad, yeah. So one of the challenging things about narcissism, and everyone's using the word, is that they talk about narcissism and they treat it like it's synonymous with psychopathy and the same as sociopathy and blah, blah, blah. Personality researchers struggled with this too, right? These things don't just it's not like there's these distinct cuts between all of these things. So there are researchers out there who are looking at these, maybe even at the nature, not evil is a strong word, but like really bad, cruel, mean, difficult personality styles. And what they found was originally the theory was called the dark triad, and it was made up of narcissism, psychopathy, and something called Machiavellianism, which is really being exploitative and willing to use other people for your own advantage, right? And what the researchers found was that these things hang together. These traits kind of all hang together, and it results in a person who is unempathic, cold, callous, calculating, often superficially very intelligent and charming, willing to make a relationship with someone and then sort of use them and for whatever they need them and then sort of abandon them, right? The researchers then expanded that theory a little further to something called the dark tetrad. So they kept the psychopathy, the narcissism, and the Machiavellianism, and they added something called sadism to the mix. So the intentional infliction of harm on someone, and kind of it feels good to harm someone. So it's dark. That's why it's called the dark tetrad. So when these traits hang together, we see, when we talk about malignant narcissism, it tends to be more of that, like really almost intentionally harmful, revenge-seeking, manipulative and cruel, and yet charming and all that stuff. There's that famous story of Dirty John, and it was an LA Times series. It was when podcasts were just beginning. Everyone was hooked. And it was basically the story of a woman, Deborah Newell, who she was in her 50s. She met a guy, charming, charismatic, handsome, everything she wanted to be. And, she's totally into him, and red flags everywhere. Her kids were adults. Her kids didn't like him, but still they move in together. Within 2 months, it was very clear something terrible about this guy, and manipulative and awful and dangerous. The whole story. And so within 2 months, she was already having to live on the lam. She was having to move every 3 days. She knew how harmful he was. And then the whole story culminates in that he knew that some of her family members were naysaying him. So he was going to try to kill her daughter, Tara, and Tara killed him. Tara in self-defense. But that guy, John Meehan, the man she was in a relationship with, was a perfect example of a dark tetrad. And so it was evil all the way down. And yet charming, charismatic, attractive. She felt special. She felt seen. I mean, enough so that she obviously pulled him into her life. And the challenge with the whole story was there was a real tendency to want to depict Deborah as foolish. But really the story to me was, this is how the manipulativeness, if you didn't know what this was, how easy it was. And back in 2017, that was only 6 years ago. We weren't talking about narcissism the way we are now. I think my first book had already just come out, but it still was sort of a small hoofbeat in this whole conversation. But that's probably one of the more classical examples of a dark tetrad person who we've sort of heard about. And then since then, there have been a lot others have come up in the media. Prisons are full of dark tetrad folks, but a lot of them are out and about. We know that dark triad people are successful business people. They can actually succeed quite brilliantly in the world because they're willing to use people. They're very manipulative. They don't care. They'll make big risky decisions because they're not afraid. So it's complicated and it is dark. And I hope someday they expand that dark tetrad theory one step further with a dark pentagon, pentad, whatever you call it, and bring paranoia into the mix. Because people who are like that they're very suspicious. They think everyone's out to get them. They feel like there's a target on their back. And that chronic suspiciousness means they're very provocative and reactive. Like, what are you looking at me for? Like, you better watch out. I know you got it in for me. And they're just, and they'll kind of start going at people that way. So I do think paranoia is in that mix too.
Right.
Yeah, so it's dark. This is some people get into relationships like this. Again, Dirty John was a great example of that. But there's, people will say, when I first met this person, they were charming, they were this, they were that. But the cracks on this will start showing pretty early. And these are relationships we often term as coercively controlling relationships, characterized by fear and menace and isolation and stealing of a person's freedoms. So we see this in domestically violent relationships all the time. Yeah.
Ooh, and so the 4 sides tetrad must be like the hardest. And what does that actually result to then? The person that has the most epic control?
It's a person who is menacing, isolating, the ultimate control. Absolutely the ultimate control. They have absolutely no care that they're harming somebody else. Even with that level of the dark tetrad, you're not seeing as much of the shame and the insecurity.
Oh,
yeah.
Because so is it psychopathy?
Psychopathy, yeah.
Do they have shame and empathy in them?
No. They can fake it though. I think the dangerous thing with psychopathy is that they know that people want you to be this sort of warm back and forth. Dirty John, he was very charming initially, really seemed like he was listening to her problems and he cared about her. So they know how to put on a show. They are able to figure out what it is people want and give them that thing to draw them close. That's the Machiavellianism.
And then the sadianism, you said?
The sadism.
Yeah, the sadism. How does that result then, if you don't mind breaking that down?
They will say terrible things to people unapologetically. They'll do hurtful things. They will hit them, harm them, steal from them. They'll get off, but they'll also get off on it. Like they'll say something cruel to someone and watch that person get devastated and almost feel gratified by it. They will watch someone fail, their whole business fall apart or their relationship fall apart, and they'll be like, karma's a bitch kind of thing. Like they'll be it's very dismissive of other people's pain. And one would argue that they may even want to be the one who's creating that pain for another person.
Would serial killers then kind of go under this bucket?
I would say a lot of serial killers probably are dark tetrad, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's so freaking fascinating. So now if, let's say, with everything we were speaking about, I really want to come full circle. If you decide that you now actually want to leave this relationship, so you've identified all their tactics that they're trying to, put on you to potentially keep you in that relationship. You're identifying all the gaslighting, like you actually see all the signs. What are the tactics that then a narcissist is going to lean into even more so to actually trap you so that you can potentially change your mind? So I've heard you speak about, like, they're obviously going to do, in the past we've spoken about like smear campaigns and things like that. What have you seen be the thing that just when you think someone's got their foot out, they end up turning around and changing their mind?
Hoovering. So the narcissistic person going back to love bombing square one. Baby, I was so wrong. I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm about to lose you. The best thing that ever happened. I'm going to get therapy. I am going to, you are worth fighting for, right? So they future fake. They say they're going to change. They say they see it all clearly. And what's so upsetting about that, it means that all along they were hearing what their partner was asking for. They didn't do it, but they weaponize it and use it as a way to suck someone in because they're thinking, well, they heard me, so they must need, that must mean it registered. No, they heard it as something they could weaponize. That's different. So they'll often hoover and really try to draw someone in that way. So that's a big one. And that often will lead people to do an about face, especially if there's stakes in the relationship, kids, shared finances, a history, culture, all of that. Big one. The other thing that can keep people stuck is when, that's the sort of the hoovery part. The other part is the abuse part, where they start literally making this such a miserable experience. It's called post-separation abuse, that the person's too scared to leave. They may threaten them. They may hit them with so many legal, if it's a divorce, so much legal stuff, that the person's like, I can't survive this. They'll make threats about custody. They'll make threats about money. They won't pay things they need to pay. The person may not have money for an attorney. And while someone else will say it'll all work its way out, when you're in the middle of it, that working its way out might be 5, 6, 7 years down the road. It's the narcissistic person, like you said, smear campaign. They'll mobilize everyone else. They'll tell other people terrible things about you. What many people have said at this phase is they say, I just wanted it to stop. And the one way I could have made it stop was if I just went back in and gave them what they wanted, and which was control back, which is they went back into the relationship. So it's just so, again, post-separation abuse, scary, frightening, unsettling, that to leave was just too much. And so they would go in almost to stop the pain.
What do you advise people in that situation?
I would say it depends on how severe it is. Like I said, at the most extreme cases, to work with the domestic violence program, if you are able to get legal resources. And I know here in LA that there are organizations like Peace Over Violence where they have legal resources available. So if you contact them, they have people available to give legal guidance. I can't say that for all. I'm honored to be a part of Peace Over Violence's advisory board, and they've been around for a long time. So these things exist in different places, but sometimes areas that are more rural, and they may not have the same kinds of support. So, like I said, I can only speak to LA where something like that exists, but sometimes domestic violence programs can yield that. Countries like the UK, which are phenomenally ahead of the curve on understanding coercive control, there are a lot of programs in the UK where their domestic violence programs are accounting for coercive control. They often have great professional guidance and people, advocates, attorneys, things like that, who get it there and can guide people through that process. But like I said, it's spotty in terms of where people can get that. And some, if you're lucky, LA, UK, you might be able to get it. Other regions, not so much, but you may need supports and information. If you're being hoovered back in, that's where therapy can become important. A safe sounding board with a therapist who gets what this looks like. As a therapist, Lisa, I can never say to someone, don't go back, don't go back. But I can really help them say, okay, how are you feeling? And help the client sort of sound it out. And sometimes they come to their own conclusion, like, who am I kidding? And if they do go back in, having a good therapist say, okay, what are we going to learn from this, and walk them through it. So, but again, not everyone can always afford therapy, and I'm aware of that.
And sorry, if you mind me asking, is that because legally you can't tell someone to go back or not to go back?
So as a therapist, my role is not to give advice or guidance. My role is to work with the client to help them understand themselves so they are their own agent of change, right? The last thing I want anyone to do is feel like, I need my therapist. No, you've got the tools. When you walk out here, you came in here with a box with a few tools in it. We're filling it the rest of the way up. We're teaching you how to use them. And the goal for me is that you go. That you at some point would say, I'm good. I've got this now. I get it. But if they feel like I've got it, what is she going to say? What guidance will she give? They're not making it from an autonomous place. I'm a sounding board. I'm a safe space, but I'm not an advice giver. I don't tell people what to do. Yeah.
Should friends then, because and maybe I'm just projecting, but if I was in your head and you just see somebody who's clearly been in an abusive relationship and you've heard all the stories and then they talk about going back, like in my head, I'd be like, I'd want to scream like, don't go back.
Remember, we're not talking about physical abuse. Like, let's,
right,
boom,
yes,
I'm lifting that out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's the problem. People in emotionally abusive relationships have been told, sometimes their whole lives, but certainly in this relationship, what to do. The last thing I want therapy is to be one more place where they're being given a command. So by getting to feeling, connecting to a sense of agency, and we use therapy as a place for a mental experiment. Like, let's play this out. Let's play out the scenario of you leaving. Because what will end up happening is because you got to remember this, Lisa, what people forget about leaving an emotionally abusive relationship is it can be dangerous. Post-separation abuse is real. The stalking, the menacing, the texting, the emailing, the smear campaigns, the guilting, the passive aggressive, the on and on, like having a damn air tag put on your car or a tracker put on your car or stuff put on your front door, not knowing there's a camera here or there or that. It's bad. So, any of us who are doing this work clinically, we already know, like, I'm like, you got to get a sweep in, you got to get an electronic sweep done of your house, got to get one done of your car. Make sure if you don't have an iPhone, if you don't have an Apple phone, make sure you find out if there's any trackers. Those discs are this big, the biggest quarter. So make sure we really have to make sure there's get their computers over to like Geek Squad to get them scanned out, make sure there's no malware. Like it goes deep. Like we really have to work with people. So it's terrifying. And some people say, I don't have the stomach for this. So it's not that simple. Are they up for it? Do they have resources? Do they have a safe place to go? Do they have money? And the answer for that for a lot of people is no.
Do you suggest in those situations, especially if it's if there is like I could just only imagine how that would feel, that someone's like coming after you, really trying to put a smear campaign out. You've built this reputation, you're a good person, and this other person who, you've said in the past, and you've said multiple times even in this episode, is that they're very charismatic. Like a lot of people do actually really gravitate towards narcissists. So you don't necessarily see all sides of them. In that situation, do you then suggest that people do things incognito, like on the side, like kind of like slowly leave a partner? Like, is that?
That's a good question. So it becomes, with something we call in psychology, successive approximations, right? You're not going to go from I'm in an emotionally abusive relationship to packing boxes just like that. And one thing I've often, suggested to clients, we use therapy as a place to mentally play it out, right? And the second is we do small things. I'm like, whatever you can get documents-wise, I need you to start scanning this stuff. We need to get this on a thumb drive, and we need to get that thumb drive out of the house. Because you're going to need this stuff, and if you can't get it, slowly get a couple of your grandmother's earrings, things that aren't community property, things that clearly, again, you cannot take anything out of that house that is shared. If you're married, shared joint property. So, but a thing like you're thinking, okay, the last thing I want is to be locked out of this house and I can't have my kids' baby shoes or something like that. Put that stuff away someplace carefully if you think you're going to need to be getting out of this. And again, check your devices for stuff too. I mean, with the cloud and all this and people on family accounts, your phone is as good as a tracking device. If you're on a family plan, I promise you that narcissistic person knows where you are all the time. So be careful. So if you go in for a legal consultation to an attorney, they don't see you pulling up to that office in Century City. Leave the phone behind. Give it to a friend, get a burner, do something so you can be in touch with people that day, but that phone isn't following you all over creation. But if it's a shared car, odds are it has a tracker on it too. So it's really about, it's about preparation. It's about being realistic. It's about tiny little steps. For some people, even thinking about the thought of leaving is a big deal. Because I have to tell you, the first time a person says to me, I need to get out of this, I'm like, checkmate. We've got this. Now we got about 55 moves to that checkmate, but now I can see the game, right? And so once they say it, it's not like, great, let's go. I'll say, okay, talk to me. How are you feeling? How are you feeling in your body? And they'll say, my God, I'm panicking. I'm like, we're just talking about it here. So the mental experiment slowly. So they've now vocalized that there could be a future outside of this relationship. Then it's painstaking work, again, somatically connected to their own psychology, their feelings, their thoughts, the practicalities. Listen, Lisa, some people are practical. They're like, I am not sharing custody of these children. And they're like, at the stroke of midnight, when my youngest child turns 18, I'm filing those papers, and they do. And they're literally, their kid's 18th birthday, they say to the attorney, pull the trigger, here we go.
And that's because they've done the steps of...
They've done all the other stuff. Yeah.
So actually, if you don't mind taking me through that, so you just said...
Depends on the situation. I mean, it depends on the situation. It's going to be different for everyone. If it's marital situation, it gets a little more tricky. It's going to be different in every state, every province, every country. So there's no uniform kind of piece here. But it's really, I think, more than anything, thinking it through. What would this mean to you? In terms of the other practicalities, it could be if there are documents you know that you might need someday if you were to go, copies of passports, things like that, birth certificates, the little glitches that you're like, you do not want, because getting those little pieces of paper, should the two of you no longer live in the same house and it's a partner, could take forever. So little things like that, getting organized, having it all in one place, getting it on a thumb drive, because if they decide to throw your computer on the ground and smash it, that's going to be a problem. So getting it on a thumb drive, getting it out of there, those little kinds of things that can help you feel like, okay, if this really continues to get south, there's a path forward. Here for me to kind of safely get out of this. It could, and like I said, what I don't want to veer too much into is sort of the domestic violence safety plan here, because that's a very different animal of go bags and safe places to go and cash, and that's a different conversation. So I'm really trying to stay in the people where in something that are saying this is becoming untenable, but I'm not ready to go yet. But should I be ready to go? What would I need to know? But those sorts of like little bits and pieces that mean that if the time comes and you're like, I'm out, and you're the one who's going to physically leave, some of that is possible. But I really think the deeper work is in therapy. For what does leaving mean? Some people will say, my parents were divorced, I vowed I'd never get divorced, and here I am. For some people, it would be they have their own abandonment wounds that are thinking like, well, what if the minute I leave, they meet someone new, or they're leaving because they feel like their partner is being sort of inappropriate or shady with someone new. Like, I don't want it to be so easy for him to go with the new person. It's complicated. So having a place to unbraid some of that stuff, but I think mentally playing it out. Like, what would this look like for me? What am I scared of? How would I feel? How would I cope? It's sort of something a person plays out over and over again. Worst case models, best case models, all of that. And then it's going to land someplace in the middle, most likely.
Well, that's so powerful there to think about, because I'm such a tactical person when I'm feeling emotional or like I'm feeling helpless is the truth. To have something to go back to that can be almost like a guiding source. Like I really love that breakdown that you just gave of how do I feel, what would leaving look like, and then coming up with those tactical steps. Did you ever see the movie Sleeping with the Enemy? Oh God, I watched that as a kid and that just haunted me. And just thinking through how she really like had these massive plans behind his back, and then the fear of getting caught as you're having these plans. So how many of your clients, and what do you advise, like as they're processing this, they still haven't made a move yet, obviously not talking about physical abuse, but maybe I want to leave this relationship. How many of them fear talking to you about that honesty or talking to you about leaving because of the fear that maybe their partner finds out? And how many people stop vocalizing maybe to their friends or to the people around them that they're struggling in a relationship because they're so worried about that getting out?
Well, I think it's less so in therapy because they know that it's a confidential space and no one's going to, that no one will know about. But with friends and others, that's a very reasonable fear. And I think that people want to be careful about even within their own world, especially if it's a relationship they've been in a long time and there's more intricate links of friendships and your partner is friends with them and all this other stuff. You want to be careful about understanding all of that. I think a lot of people are afraid that their plan could be found out. Again, we're not talking about severe domestic abuse, that kind of thing. We're really talking about people who are in emotionally abusive, classically narcissistically abusive situations. One fear people have is that, okay, they're going to figure out what I'm up to, and then they're going to start their hoovering process. They're going to be really nice, and that's just going to make this harder. I've had numerous clients say to me, I just want them to stay terrible for a really long time, so this will feel easier. Yeah.
And that's part of the fear of saying
the fear
anything.
of maybe I'm wrong. The big fear people have is like, especially if it's been a long time, maybe I'm wrong. Some people are afraid of dating. So they're saying, okay, this is the devil I know. Do I really want to put myself out there? And I say, you know what? Someplace between being in this relationship and a new person is this whole beautiful world called you being on your own and figuring out who you are. And that I think it's people, already going into the, how am I going to meet someone new? I'm like, that's not even on the radar right now. Where, if indeed you're going to leave this is about you getting back to who you really are subjectively. Who are you? And taking ownership of that. And then and only then. And I always, you know me, I tell 12 months. 12 months off if you've been to one of these relationships. Nothing. No kiss, no sex, no flirt, no dating app, no date, no nothing. I met the perfect person. They'll be there in 9 months. If they're not, then they weren't the perfect person. No.
That's what I was going to ask. How many people need to process, like, why do they fear being alone, and that being with somebody who's toxic is actually better than being alone? One of the biggest fallacies is that relationships shouldn't be work. Say what? We put time, effort, and hard work into growing our careers or our business, but love should just happen? After 20 years of being married, all starts with being willing to ask and answer hard questions. I have a free downloadable PDF for you for a happy, successful, lasting love. Click the link below for free access to the most important questions you must ask your partner PDF.
Well, I don't think people have always processed that fear of being alone. And it's complicated, right? There's sometimes people will say, oh my gosh, like when they're out of town, I'm so much happier. So you're alone. They're on a business trip, you're telling me you're happier. So there's small A alone and there's big A alone, right? Small A alone is they're out of town for 3 days and I get to have the dog in the bed with me. Big A alone is you're single and you don't have your person. That's what I want to understand the meaning of. Because you're saying you love when they're gone, but there's a bigger existential issue of what it means. And again, I think one thing I'm happy about in the world is we're no longer fetishizing people being in relationships like, ooh, your life's going to be so much better. I just read an interesting article in The Atlantic that said people who are married are generally happier, which I found fascinating. I would say probably people who are happily married are generally happier. We've got to create a world where people feel whole within themselves, and then and the enhancement in their life is their relationship. But I think that from a pretty early age, we sell people a bill of goods of love stories and pairing off and dyads. We are, though, now millennials and the generation of the Gen X's, we're now going to start seeing generations where probably the rate of non-marriage might be equal or higher than marriage. You know, so I think that that's, to me, strangely enough, I'm going to say that's promising. I don't think it's that young people and people coming into adulthood aren't going to get into relationships. They're going to be playing by a different set of rules and fluidity. But I think above all else, teaching people how to be comfortable with their own company. They may say, listen, I love being at a party. I love other, great. But to enjoy your solitude as much as you enjoy being with other people, but never feeling that you have to sell your soul to avoid being alone. That's the piece that we're trying to avoid. So helping people cultivate that sense of being alone and loving it.
Yeah, I love that. And then more, now that your work has just spanned so much now and you're reaching so many people around the world, are you noticing now that you can identify narcissists more and now more people can identify narcissists, are there more narcissists or are we creating more narcissists?
It's messy, right? There have always been narcissistic people since I think documented history. They were our leaders. And there are people in the history books, right? These are the people who are dominant and controlling and got their way, and dictators, and pick someone in history. Odds are if they're in the history book, they might have been narcissistic, right? So I think it's always been a problem. And I think now we have a name for it. You got to remember the term's only been around as it applies to human beings for about maybe 100, maybe 120 years on the long side. So it's a relatively new construct, right? I think that we just assumed that there were people who were the way they were, and because the world has always been so sort of traditional, patriarchal, all of that, it's like, well, that's just how they are. They're the boss, right? Father knows best and all that nonsense. And so I think that we are now shedding light on what's acceptable behavior in a relationship. And now that's, and I still don't think we're there. I think a lot of people still think, well, they have a lot of money, or, oh, they're really creative, or, well, they're a genius, and maybe this goes along with it. I said, you could be a genius, right? Doesn't mean you have to be in a relationship with them. If they're mistreating you, I don't care if they're a genius. I don't care if they're a trillionaire. I don't care if they're the greatest artist that ever lived. It's unacceptable. And we often use those kinds of qualities to excuse it. And we're very much in a time where it's the real cult of status and hip cred and all of that. So those things, narcissistic people are stronger and all those things. So I don't know if there's more. I think the only reason I'd say probably, possibly, is social media. I think social media, internet fame, all of that has definitely ramped it up. Being seen is everything, right? So everyone's frame of reference has become themselves. And if it's too much themselves and they're not cultivating sort of the empathy, the empathic presence with other people, there could be a greater entitlement fostered in that. People aren't regulating themselves as well. I think we tell too many kids how they're more special than everybody else, and that's creating it too. I think parenting practices probably have gone a little bit more too much to the permissive direction. And so I think it's a lot of things are competing. There's always been narcissists. I just think that what's happening is now we're more aware of what is not okay in a relationship, and we're not excusing it.
Why am I hearing more then of, I'm just going to say females because obviously I have a very female-oriented show, women will say that their partner, usually the guy, has like, oh my God, a lot of women have had experiences now with narcissistic men. But a lot of people also say that when they're talking about their parents, that it's usually the mother that's a narcissist.
Yeah. So it blows up that myth that narcissism is almost exclusively men. Again, a lot of people do have invalidating, cruel, dismissive, unempathic, manipulative mothers, and who may very well have had those traits since their childhood all the way up. So obviously, if a woman is hetero and she had a mom and now she has got a relationship, there's a vulnerability. Having a mom like that could leave a daughter feeling not enough, unlovable, uncherishable, unattractive. Narcissistic mothers are notorious about commenting about their daughter's weight, their daughter's appearance, which are major boundary violations, what they eat, all of that, right? So it really sets a girl up to feel not enough. And who better than to take advantage of that than a narcissistic partner who's basically mirroring the propaganda that this person was delivered as a child. Feels familiar.
Are you more likely then to be to get is it trauma bonded with a narcissist if you've had a narcissistic mother?
Parent, not just
Sorry,
mother.
yeah.
Either, yeah.
But I normally hear about it as mothers though. And maybe again, that's just like the funnel that I get the messaging from. But again, it's the narcissist, the parent is typically the mother is a narcissist, but yet the partner is typically the
Yeah,
male.
I mean, I think that's a unique self-selection. 'Cause I have to say, having worked in this,
Yeah.
I hear it just as much father. I think a narcissistic mother is more impactful. Does that make sense? Because a mother is often a primary caregiver. For a daughter, maybe more significant parent. If a family has a dissolution, you're more likely to have been raised by the mother. So I think all of those things might make the presence of the mother more salient, honestly. Yeah.
And are the traits different then? So they appear in the same, because to your point where you were saying a mother more likely insult her daughter's like weight and her appearance. Would that be the same if they had a son?
I think that a narcissistic mother with a son, in all cases, I think they're going to manipulate. Why don't you spend more time with me? Or why do you ask so much from me? Or you don't recognize all the things I did for you. I gave up so much for you. Lots of victimization. I think with a girl, it might be more, or daughter, might be more weight and shape stuff because a narcissistic mother's probably going to have that obsession herself. Yeah, so it's just a projection of that stuff onto the same gendered daughter.
Versus if it was the father that was a narcissist.
Father might comment on weight and shape, depends on whatever his status orientation is. Maybe negating, maybe minimizing, maybe all the usual narcissistic dynamics. Again, it's all like sort of what is salient to that parent. A lot of narcissistic parents care desperately what their children look like physically to the world. Are they attractive? Are they sporty? Are they going to the right college? Are they this? Are they that? So they'll invest a lot of their focus on that child's appearance.
And would it be hard then to leave a narcissistic relationship if you have a narcissistic parent because it's so intertwined in almost like who you are?
Yeah, because the trauma bonding is going to be more potent, right? Because as a child, That child who had an invalidating parent had to learn to make the excuses and the justifications for that parent over and over again, because a child's never going to say, oh, I have a narcissistic parent. They don't even think their parent's a bad person, because that would put them at risk of, well, then who's going to take care of me? So the child internalizes all of the blame and all of that on themselves. I did something wrong. I need to be better. I need to keep my room cleaner. I need to not make a fuss. And they kind of, they'll really make it about themselves. In some cases, the kid will rebel, but in most cases, they'll often internalize. And so that pattern will then jump into adulthood. And they never got an accurate sense of who they were. If you have a narcissistic parent, you don't get to fully form your identity, because your identity is fully in the service of the parent. It's to soothe them. It's to tell them they're great. It's to never take the spotlight away. It's to be in their service. It's to win them over. So your entire identity is based on being for another.
So how do you heal from that then?
That's a longer path. It's a longer path, right? It's a lot of it's education, educating a person about these patterns. It's about cutting through the guilt and shame. Some people feel damaged by it, depending on how severe the narcissism of the parent was. Some people have what we call complex trauma, which requires much more trauma-informed approaches like EMDR or somatic interventions, that kind of thing. It's a much more intense sort of focus. Yeah.
And would you advise then someone needs to do that work to really heal as an adult and to find a healthy relationship as an adult?
If they had narcissistic parents, I think it's important, because I think otherwise the programming puts a person at risk for choosing badly. But I'll say that, Lisa, and I know people who had deeply narcissistic parents and ended up choosing wonderful partners. Some of them said it was sheer luck that they did. Some of them said it was sheer force of will. They're like, I'm just picking the opposite of this parent. More often than not, they're more likely to end up in a relationship where they're invalidated. But I don't think it's a sentence where it's your destiny. You're stuck with that. I think some people make it happen by luck, by happenstance, by hard work. But it definitely ups the risk.
And you really do think it's luck?
I do think it's luck.
Really?
I think a lot of good relationship stuff is luck. And this is why people in happy relationships should never weigh in on the relationships of other people. I think people with happy relationships need to shut their mouths, step the hell out, and let the people with the tough relationships get up there and be the ones to, we're so happy, and this is what we do. Shut up. Just shut up. It's almost like, I went to a liquor store and I bought a lottery ticket. So let me talk to you about financial management. I'm like, fool, you walked to a liquor store, bought a lottery ticket, you got lucky. I don't want to hear your version of financial management. So there's nothing I take more umbrage at is happily married people who talk about their relationship. It is so, and it really messes with the heads of narcissistic people. We just have a laugh at their expense. I'm like, come on. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of luck. I think that, listen, there are people out there. Are there some people who say, I met a good person and I was bored by them? Sure, but that's a smaller number than you'd think. And I think for many, many people, there's a lot of societal pressure to get into a relationship. People are not taught what is healthy. They're not taught how to choose a partner. If we spent as much time as we do on courses that these kids are never going to use, and we put it into really frank conversations about what's acceptable in a relationship, about partner choice, about all of that. But a lot of it's luck. And I'll tell you this, I've worked with more than a few clients who have been married 40, 45, 50 years, right? Terrible. 50 years of sheer freaking hell, of invalidation, of infidelity, of betrayal, awful. And they had peers who were married. And they look back at the original period of getting in the relationship. There's nothing really that sinister. In fact, if anything, they're like, yeah, this person was just really driven in their career, and I kind of came from a more financially precarious place, so I was happy about this. And they looked at their friends and they said, it was luck. It was luck. They chose the nice guy. I chose a guy who I thought was a nice guy and wasn't a nice guy. And again, it's 50 years ago. The conversation around divorce was a lot different. Sometimes for a narcissistic person too, how they're succeeding in the world can also have a lot to do with how they are as a partner. So for the narcissistic person, if their life goes well, they work hard and they make money, that can often make them a little more bearable. They're probably still going to cheat on you, but a little more bearable than the always failing narcissist who's not getting promoted. The vulnerable narcissist, those victimized narcissists, they have more trouble at work. And so then they have the problem of lack of resource and all that other stuff. But I think there's a lot of luck in it. I really, really do. A person meets someone and the timing was right and they meet and it's good and they stick it out and blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of luck. And I think that's where I think that I take umbrage at the people who found someone. They're like, we have all the secrets. I'm like, you don't have any damn secrets. So stop. No more. I just tell my clients to not listen to it. I'm like, I'm like, right now together, we're deleting this app off your phone so you don't listen to this anymore.
Yeah.
And they stop and they say it makes a big difference.
And that fills them better.
Yeah.
What makes you say that they'll probably cheat? You just...
Rich narcissistic people almost always cheat.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there tend to be grandiose narcissists, and grandiose narcissistic people, they're very fantastical in their whole conceptions of love, and so they get swept away very easily. They're very impulsive, and so they are they're off on the weekend and someone catches their eye, and again they feel entitled to what they want. They're grandiose enough to think they won't get caught. They're grandiose enough to think, oh my God, this could be a once in a lifetime such and such, and they don't have empathy, so they're not thinking about how it would hurt someone else. That to me is a cheating cocktail right there.
I was going to say, that's a recipe for disaster. Well, Dr. Ramani, as always, you have so much value. Like, I could literally just ask you questions until like everyone's gone home and I'm still here asking you questions. Where can people find you? All the amazing work that you're putting out on narcissism.
Well, please go to my website, drramani.com. You'll find everything there. Go to my YouTube. Every day, some new wacky insight about these relationships and about healing from them. I have a podcast, Navigating Narcissism. Great conversations with people who have been through narcissistic relationships and people who have insights on how sort of some tools people can have to cope better with them and what we know about how people with these personalities, how these relationships work. I have a healing program. So people really want to do a deep dive into healing from narcissistic abuse. We have a healing program. If you go to my website, my Instagram, it's all there. And it's a great way. We have a great community, thousands of people, monthly workshops, monthly Q&As, all kinds of great resources. So there's that happening. I have books. I have a new book coming out in February, which we'll talk about. And I mean, it's all there. Just go to the website. You'll find it on one place.
Keep watching to learn how to transform self-sabotage into self-improvement.
Today, really where I want to go is talk about how many of us have been hurt and have scars. And the scars really do leave us with emotional turmoil and emotional baggage. And I have a quote of yours that I'd actually love to read out. You need to transform the scars it left on you from constant reminders of the pain you went through to reminders of how far you've come.
Yes.
How do you start to do that if the scars are still painful?
If the scars are still painful, then they are still begging to be felt by you. They are still begging to be seen by you and not looked at through a lens of shame or judgment, like, I shouldn't have gone through you, I shouldn't have experienced you. They want you to sit with them and speak to them and to yourself with the compassion you needed in that moment, with the compassion they needed in that moment. So when something continuously hurts, it's that kind of pain where you're fine throughout the day and then the nighttime starts to come and that pain starts creeping up. And it's like, it's this cycle of I'm fine and then I'm reminded and I wake up in the morning and I'm like, today's a new day, I'll be fine. And then at night I'm reminded. It's because I haven't fully given myself permission to say, I am going to radically accept. And by that, I don't mean I'm saying it's okay that it happened. I'm just saying it happened. I'm validating that it happened. Maybe I wasn't okay with it, but I understand that there is absolutely no way for me to go back and reverse it or change it. I accept that it happened. I accept that there was nothing different I could have done about it at the time. And I accept that it is my responsibility from that moment to now to come closer to myself in a way where I'm not blaming myself or judging myself for having gone through that. So think of a scab. If every night, like with that pain that we're talking about, every night you're picking at it and then the next day you just leave it alone and you give it some time to heal a little bit. And then before it fully heals, you're picking at it again. That's what you're doing. You're not fully looking at it and saying, oh, this actually needs some ointment. This needs a Band-Aid. This needs some form of like real healing power, compassion, inner acceptance, whatever it is. I can do that. And then after a while, it'll stop hurting as much as it's hurting right now. But as long as I'm repeating the cycle, it just becomes even more painful and the scar becomes even worse. You know that.
God, that's
Yeah.
so true. Okay, so that is so profound. So now I really want to go deeper because, as you know, if someone's listening right now, they're like, okay, I'm not going to ignore my scars. I'm really going to acknowledge that it
Yes.
happened. That's super freaking powerful. How do you start doing that? How do you start to accept it without reliving the blame, reliving the shame, reliving the I wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda, all of those things that often come with that reminder of what happened in the past? Because I think when we look at what are the things that hold people back from healing, I think it is that they feel like they're actually unearthing the problem that happened before. But to your point, you actually can't heal until you do. So now it's like, how do you start to navigate those two things?
Yeah, so really what you want to do is just bury it and forget about it and pretend like it never happened and you just hope it goes away. It's a decision. It starts with a decision to say, I want to heal from this. I know how much this hurts, and I know that it broke me in a way that every single time I think back to it, it breaks me again. So every time I try to heal from it by going back to it, I just hurt even more. But you have to remind yourself that you can revisit that place. And instead of having the mindset, like that place in the past when the event happened, instead of having the mindset that's like, oh, I should have done things differently, or I could have said this way, or I should have been stronger, you are judging yourself. This is you in the past, and you're coming as your present self. You're not sitting with this person. You're not understanding them or giving them the compassion they needed in that moment, which is, I know you're doing your best. I know that in this moment, you don't think and don't believe that you have the power to do more. I know this. And then there's the self-forgiveness part that comes in, where my present self is telling this past self of mine, we need to forgive ourselves for not knowing any better back then. It's not like we're forgiving ourselves for choosing to inflict this pain on ourselves. People will hurt you. It's not your choice, but your choice is to say, I'm going to take this pain and not say that I deserved it because I didn't know any better, and not say that I deserved it because I didn't protect myself any better. Give you an example. Say this painful event that you're talking about is a heartbreak, and every time your present self comes to your past self, it looks at this past self and says, well, you missed all these red flags. You should have been more protective of yourself. You should have been like you heard in this interview where someone was advising you to just always be strong and never show your cards and never really open up to this person. So you're basically telling your past self being vulnerable is wrong. Being open to connection is wrong. When what your past self needs to hear is, wanting connection is the most basic human need we have. Good for you for giving it a try. That's amazing. The fact that someone didn't honor that, the fact that someone cheated on you, the fact that someone decided they no longer want to be with you, that doesn't mean your vulnerability is wrong. That just means that this person wasn't the right one for you. There is someone out there for you. So take that dialogue from being full of shame and judgment and I should have, I could have, to I understand. I get it. Be that best friend for yourself in that moment. So first, decide that you want to heal from this painful event. Second, become the person you needed for yourself in that moment. So stop trying to bring your past self here. You need to go back to your past self and sit with her, with him, with them.
Oh my God, that is so powerful because the judgment piece, oh my God, how many of us do that, right? Look back and judge our past behavior. And I think that giving ourselves the grace that we didn't know any different then, and to stop beating ourselves up over that, because I hear what you're saying is part of our that subconscious messaging is now telling us you shouldn't have been vulnerable, you shouldn't have put yourself out there, but actually you just did the best you could with the tools and experience that you currently have. And going back to where we started with the scars, as you were talking, it was like, you know how someone can say to you, you know, don't touch the stove because it's hot. They can tell you, but to be honest, it's until you've actually touched it, burnt yourself, got the scar to go, oh crap, that hurt, maybe I'll learn my lesson. I think it's very powerful to think through that the scar is actually the beautiful thing that has now taught you that lesson that you wouldn't have maybe known before. That's so beautiful.
And sometimes, Lisa, we make decisions feeling in the moment like it's the wrong decision, but we still make it. So there are many people who tell me, but I did know that I was making a mistake in the past. Like my gut was telling me, just don't trust this person anymore. Don't move forward with this relationship. Don't take the next step in your relationship. But I did. And so, you know, how do I forgive myself for that? And I always remind the person, think of what your intention was in the moment. Was your intention to be hurt, lied to, manipulated? Or was your intention to give someone another chance? Was your intention to see the best in another person? Was your intention to feel loved by this other person? That's beautiful and nothing to be judged for at all. And we start judging ourselves, and it's like, yeah, your mind knew better, but your life up to that point, you operated through certain patterns of self-abandonment and self-betrayal and constantly seeing the best in others, even when they've shown you the worst in themselves, or you've been operating in a way where you don't know boundaries and you feel bad when you set a boundary, or even think that maybe you have the right to set a boundary. So you need to, like I said, you need to go back to your past self. Even if they knew better logically, you need to sit with them and understand why it is that they still went against what they knew. And that's going to teach you so much about yourself and the work that you need to do.
God, okay, so in doing that though, when you know better, building the tools around you to then act, because in everything that you're saying, it's super powerful. And there's that one part of it, right, is acknowledging, understanding and recognizing. But then there really is that other part that is like, and now that you recognize, how do you start to set yourself up for success? And then also recognize that it's a process, so that maybe in 3 months from now, if you end up slipping, you end up making, let's just say, an error or a bad judgment call or something like that, how do you prevent yourself from then spiraling back into, oh my God, see, I knew that I was this person, I told myself a year ago, and now you feel like you're back at square one?
Yes. I think the number one thing is stop being hard on yourself and stop anticipating that the absolute worst will happen, where you will be presented with a decision or some kind of a scenario and that you will make decisions based on your past. I think when we are hard on ourselves, we always worry about that. Like, yeah, maybe this time I got it right, but what if I don't get it right in 2 months? So the most important thing when it comes to taking the knowledge to the doing part is understanding the disconnect. So I'm going to give you an example. The period of my life that I went through when I became aware that I am a people pleaser, because before I used to say things like, no, that's just who I am. I'm just very nice. I don't like hurting people. I don't like it when someone's upset because of me. But it didn't matter if I didn't do anything wrong. I was more worried about how they felt about what I did, which had absolutely nothing to do with me, right? But if I sensed that someone was displeased with a decision I made for myself, I would go back on my decision so that that person wouldn't feel disappointed, ashamed of me, whatever it was, whatever that feeling or the treatment that they were giving me was. So I tended to do that, and then I internalized it as, well, I'm just that kind of person who doesn't like to upset anybody, you know? I want to be just kind to everybody. And but once I became aware that that's actually a result of being a people pleaser, I decided that I no longer wanted to be a people pleaser. So logically, I understood that if I made a decision for myself and say my mom or my dad or a relative of mine or someone I really love looked at me with, I can't believe you would do something like this. Logically, I knew that that's on them. Like, I made a decision for myself, so why do I have to carry the weight of what you're feeling as a result of that? Like, I'm already dealing with how hard this decision is. But then as soon as I would feel that I disappointed one of them, I would just go back to that little child that's like, please continue to love me the way you did before. Please don't be disappointed by me. Please don't. And I would go back on my decision. And then 2 hours later, I would think, I just let myself down. I knew better. How could I have done that? And it's because my body has frozen and gone numb every single time I let someone down. My body has wanted to run away from me towards that person, saying, please don't change the way you see me and the way you love me. So I can't expect my body that lived 27, 28 years in that way to just have a flip of a switch and be like, we're not doing that anymore. So now I've become like at that turning point where now the knowledge is there. I've become a witness to my body. So if I'm sitting here and you're someone I really love and I'm telling you I made a decision for myself that I know is going to upset you, and you just give me that look, or you start, say for example, you have a family gathering later and you don't invite me to it or you don't tell me about it. That little child inside of me that normally would run to you and beg you, now I'm seeing that little child and telling her, you deserve to be loved by this person. You deserve to be pushed to make decisions for yourself. You deserve to not feel like your belonging in someone else's life or your worthiness of belonging in someone else is based on you not being yourself. So now I start tending to that inner child of mine. I start tending to that, the person who's lived a certain way for 28 years instead of looking for the relief from the outside by going against what I know. And then at the end of the day, I can say, this was a really hard day. It was exhausting because I am breaking my conditioning. I'm breaking my patterning. And that isn't as simple as knowing that I need to do it or knowing that it's there. You're becoming your own therapist. You're becoming your own place where you go to when you feel like the world around you is telling you, you being yourself is too much. It's wrong. You come back to yourself and validate for yourself that actually me being myself is my ultimate life purpose and goal. And if I'm gonna have to go against what my authenticity tells me just to be in certain people's lives, I'd rather be alone for a while and then start building connections with people who welcome me as I am. But I'm not going to stay in this stuck place where I want to be authentic and I still want to surround myself with people who have this much space for my authenticity. I need people who have the whole world for my authenticity. They are a safe space for me the way I've become a safe space for myself. So one of the other things I would advise any person who is aiming to go from knowing to actually doing and putting it into action is look at your environment and look at the people you're surrounding yourself with. Look at your supports, your resources, because that really affects how empowered you feel to move through healing. So think about it this way. You have 24 hours in a day. You go through a very triggering experience where, say, you tried setting a boundary and you were treated very passive aggressively. You were treated in a way that just made you feel like this boundary that you set is wrong, and therefore you are wrong, and therefore you don't deserve my kindness. So imagine that the healing you're doing is breaking out of your your enmeshment with that person. As in, for anybody who doesn't know what enmeshment is, it's basically you get rid of boundaries. They just don't exist. If I'm enmeshed with you, the way you feel, I feel the same way. It bleeds into me and vice versa. So if I'm trying to break from that, and I'm putting myself in an environment where every single day when I try to set a boundary or try to speak up, I am being triggered back into my, please don't change the way you see me. And so I'm like taking a little step and then going back and taking a little step and going back, and it's exhausting. So you need to remove yourself when you're ready from environments that constantly give you that trigger to go back, You need to put yourself in environments where that doesn't happen, where it doesn't happen very often. Yes, you're going to go out into the world and try to set boundaries, and people will be upset. But if your main primary environment that you're putting yourself in every single day is constantly testing you, right? Your survival is to just, okay, I don't want to upset you. I need peace. But I'm not at peace. I'm only at peace because I've managed you and your emotions, right? My answers are always so long.
I love them because here's what's important. I don't just want this or any of the conversations to just be chat, right? It actually, if we're looking for real impact, going deep like that is so important, because when I think about why do we as women really struggle with certain things, it's the nuances of something, right? It's not just like, oh, ignore your scars and, learn from them and move on. There's so much damn nuance. There's so much damn nuance. And I think that by ignoring the nuances of what we're talking about isn't actually going to create change. So when I think about, okay, people understand this isn't working for me. I'm devastated. This relationship or this situation isn't making me feel good. Why don't people change? Why don't people act? It's because there's a massive gap between knowing and doing.
Yes.
And it isn't out of lack of want or trying. I think it's lack of the nuances that end up becoming the reason why people don't get themselves out of it.
Yes.
And so by you giving these little details, it's so damn powerful.
That's beautiful what you just said, about what is actually missing between the knowledge and the application, between the knowing and the doing. It's not a lack of will or you gave me goosebumps when you said that, because the amount of advice I see online or people who give these motivational talks where they say get up and do this and I'm just well, a person isn't leaving a toxic relationship or a toxic family relationship or a toxic workplace because they don't want to. They really want to. They are struggling to understand why they haven't done it yet. And it's because their whole life survival, again, if your body lived through a certain patterning and conditioning for X number of years, it is not going to overnight break out of that patterning and conditioning. So a person needs to understand for themselves, why am I struggling with leaving this toxic place when I really want to leave? And every day I'm complaining to my friends and my family and the people I love the most, telling them this place is really making me miserable, and I'm paying this much money for meds to actually deal with this place, and I'm paying this much money for activities that end up not making me feel any better. I'm numbing with so many things. A person who's stuck knows they're stuck. They don't need you to remind them that they're stuck. They need you to sit with them and try to bridge that gap between who they are now and what they know now and who they have been and what they've known and done throughout their years. It's not just, I'm not looking at you in isolation right now, because you're not in isolation right now. You're a compilation of all of your experiences. 6 years ago, I was a completely different person than who I am today. A year ago, I was a completely different person than who I am today. And I grow through learning about all the imaginary cages I had around me. They really were imaginary, but I can say that now. But back then, they felt like real bars around me. Like, I can't step past this, because if I do, I'll be in trouble. And so sometimes you look at a person and you see them in this big space, but when they're looking around themselves, they see themselves in a little tiny cage that they can't move from. So a person doesn't need you to tell them, oh, just walk over here. They needed to go over there, sit beside them, and try to understand, why are you so scared to step forward? Why are you so scared to leave this confined space? And that's when everything starts coming up. I'm thinking about myself about 6 years ago when I first started writing and putting my writings out there. And I used to be very sheltered. I looked at family, culture, and religion as they are just these big, bold red lines that have to be a certain way, and you simply cannot cross them. And at the time, it wasn't even, you simply cannot cross them, because it was, you can't even contemplate crossing them, because if you do, then you are just such a bad person, and you are someone who isn't worthy of belonging, or you're just worthy of shame, like actual shame. Not just that I'm going to exclude you in some way, but I'm going to look at you and say, how dare you do this or break this rule or whatever.
And just to add, sorry, that if you do question it, you're shunned even more.
Yes. If you do question it, you're just like, you're looked at as, well, why would you ask that question? It's just, that's just the way things are. That's just the way things are. Which honestly, I want to start using that now with people, like when they challenge me on my own decisions. When, you know, when people tell you, well, you weren't like this before. Like, you're different now.
And they say it as an insult, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you weren't like that before. And for me in particular, when I get those words, it's usually an attempt to shame me and make me feel like the person I've become now is selfish and only thinks of herself and doesn't, again, going back to the enmeshment, I'm not worried about other people's feelings based on the decisions I make for myself, which I look at that and I'm like, that's beautiful. I wish everybody could be that way. But now I should use that response. That's just like, that's just the way things are now.
I love it,
you know?
so much. I want everyone right now, guys, you've got to be writing this down.
Yeah.
That's genius. Having those go-to lines as well, because in that moment, right, they're trying to disrespect you. They're trying to push you down because you've now stood up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're now saying, I'm no longer going to take X, Y, and Z. This is the person I'm going to show up. It takes a lot of hard work to then show up to be that person.
Yes.
And it's a power play. That is it, period, right? Is that person trying to overpower you. And in that moment, how do you respond? A lot of us, and me, myself, I start to stutter because I'm like, now I start to get insecure, right? It starts to press the button. It starts to make me feel like I'm that little Lisa again that couldn't stand up for herself, that couldn't speak
the
up.
way you lived for so many years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so having that go-to phrase is so damn genius. I love that. You need to trademark it. You need to keep posting that quote on your page.
That's the way things are right now. And you don't have to explain why you changed or why you don't care about their feelings about you and your decisions anymore. You don't need to explain that. You never had to. You thought you did. You never needed to seek permission from anyone on how to be yourself or how to be authentic with yourself, but you were convinced if my authenticity and my connection to others If those two things are too close, and if my connection with someone is threatened when I'm authentic, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna not be authentic so I can have the connection. Right? So now that I understand my authenticity is more important than my connection with people who tell me you cannot be yourself because that's too much, that's selfish, that's too out there and too unique and too whatever, because that's really what they're trying to tell you. So you can look at those people and say, you don't have to say it to their faces, but you can say it within. I no longer want this connection, because the reason I was trying to get this connection in the first place is to get confirmation that my authentic self is okay, but it wasn't even my authentic self that you were accepting and loving. It was a show that I put on, or just a broken version of me who's like trying to fit into a mold that isn't me. So I can choose that I no longer want this, and I don't need to explain to you why I'm no longer seeking this connection with you.
God damn, I've never heard of that combination of authenticity really like butting heads with connection. That was so profound and so beautiful. It's really made me think about, how do we start to make change? Having these little moments of like aha, where it's like, I get it now. Now allows people who are watching or listening, in those moments, don't beat yourself up that you used to be the person that would always prioritize connection, but now in those moments, pause and ask yourself, am I being authentic? Because if that becomes your North Star, because I'm such a fan of North Stars, right? Like if my North Star is authenticity, now I'm comparing everything to my authenticity. So now if connection bumps up against authenticity, I've told myself my North Star is to be authentic. So now the connection may not be right, which means that they may not be the right person.
Yes.
That's so profound. Holy smokes. Okay, and then one more thing that I wanted to add that you've spoken about that lines very much is about our worthiness. Is that we look to other people to be accepted so that we feel worthy. And I have a quote of yours that's so damn fire. You said you can't equate your worthiness based on if they stay or not.
And you can't equate your worthiness based on their willingness to see your worthiness.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, very, 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 very powerful to repeat that to yourself. I will not equate my worthiness of love or belonging or respect on how willing someone is to give me those things. You've heard this before. You've had friends say this to you before. Maybe if I say it in this way, they'll understand and they'll see me. Maybe if I, carry myself differently, I can show them and prove to them who I am as a person. With the right person for you, and I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, with the right people for you, you will not have to prove anything. You will just be yourself. A friend of mine told me a story. He was like, Stefan, I talk about him all the time. He's in my book, Welcome Home, because he's incredible. So he told me a story that's like, two people are having a conversation. One of them is carrying a glass of wine, and someone just kind of walks into this person who's carrying the glass of wine and says, oh, like, how come you spilt wine? And the person says, well, it's because you bumped into me. And the answer isn't because you bumped into me. It's because that's what I'm carrying. And I'm getting somewhere with this story. So let's talk about abuse. When someone just blows up on you and you ask them, like, why would you speak to me that way? And they tell you, well, it's because you pushed me. No. It's because that's who you are and that's how you speak. That's what you have on the inside. So it's not the reason that you spill anything on someone isn't that they bumped into you. It's because that's what you have within you. And if you had good stuff within you, that's what's going to spill as well. So many people think, like, I just need to manage how I talk to this person so that they don't speak to me a certain way, or they don't look at me as a bad person or as selfish or whatever. But it's like, that's not the problem. The problem would exist with or without you. That's what they see in people. They look at people as selfish and manipulative, and just because it could be because they're better than them. It could be because they have a very cynical view of the world. So the way that someone is not willing to see you for who you are and your worthiness of love and respect and kindness, that's not because you're not showing yourself in the right way. That's because that's how they see you and the people around you. So the change doesn't have to happen from you, where you just exhaust yourself trying to convince them and make them see, you know, she deserves love. She deserves respect. Like, I really respect her. No, they need to change the way that they see the world. They need to change the way that they see you. And sometimes a person will tell you after a relationship ended, a person who used to treat you really badly will look you in the eye and say, you are honestly the kindest person I've ever met. And you'll be so confused and saying, but you didn't tell me that when we were together. It's not that they're not seeing, they're not willing to see. They know, but they are not willing to break their own way of thinking and seeing the world for you. So stop focusing on trying to change their willingness to see you for who you are, and start just being who you are. The moment you find yourself, like, this is your best indicator that you are working hard to prove your worth. The moment you start thinking, oh, I should do this differently just so that that person could see it that way, you are in a position where you are being made to prove your worth. And you can make a choice. You can say, I know who I am and I know what I deserve. I am just going to be myself. I'm not going to do anything differently. Or you can decide to do what you know they would impress them or they want to see. And then later you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and think, wow, I really changed something about myself just so that I could see that glow in that person's eyes that tells me, I'm impressed by you. And so you might feel better based on that external validation you got, but you got that external validation after choosing to internally abandon yourself, right?
Yeah, and that validation piece is so powerful, because going back to your glass analogy, a lot of us will go, okay, so I'll just make sure that the next time they walk in the room, next time they're rushing by, I'm going to step out of the way so that I didn't spill the glass, and now they don't have to apologize. So now you're thinking of them, right? And now what you're doing is you are contorting yourself to work around their parameters versus saying, what are my parameters, and does my relationship with them actually fit that? So you have actually got a quote of yours that talks about this, which is really about, we give our power away so that we can feel that validation. And in the real time, we think, oh no, it's actually like we get validation out of it. It's a dripping effect. Every day it's dripping on you. That you're giving your power away, you're doing it for somebody else. And then eventually it ends up making you powerless, feeling like you're being mistreated and you don't know where to go with it. And I love your quote. You say, basically, it's a decision. You get to decide how much power over your healing you want to give the person who already hurt you.
So actually, the last interview you and I had, there was that really viral clip where every single time I share it, it gets like millions of views. The one where I say, do you really need the person who hurt you to apologize to you? Do you really need the person who hurt you to validate for you that they hurt you? Do you need them to give you permission to start healing by saying, yes, I hurt you, go ahead, start healing? You don't need it, you want it. Because you want that validation, absolutely, it's a basic human need. But you don't need it to move forward, because who lived that pain? You did. So why do you need the person who gave you that pain to say, yes, I gave it to you? You need to, again, sit with yourself and say, how did that feel in that moment? How did that pain feel all those years? So bad and so painful, and it pushed me to do things and numb in ways that I don't see myself through. Therefore, instead of continuing to put my healing on hold and numbing through all these other things, or even closing myself up to new connections just because of how painful this pain was, I'm going to say, I need to heal from the pain I'm carrying. They've already handed it to me. I just need to start healing from it. I need to start, like I said earlier, accepting it. Not saying it was okay, but accepting it, and accepting myself who was in that moment who received that pain, and accepting myself from that moment on until this present moment with everything that I did to try to heal from it, whether it was good or bad, healthy or not healthy. I need to be the one who is there for myself when the pain started because someone else chose not to be there for me. I need to choose to not also abandon myself in addition to that person abandoning me, because then I'm leaving this person somewhere in the past, and now I've dissociated from her, and this person who hurt her has also dissociated from her, and so she's just left alone. So what I need to do is go back to her with that pain that was given, because she's still carrying it, and I'm still carrying it, but I'm not doing anything about it, but it's just weighing me down, because there's a part of me in the past, that old self of mine, who's just waiting for me to come back and get her. And I'm not doing that because I'm like, nope, I need to move forward. And maybe when this person comes back and apologizes, I will go back to that moment. Well, that person they've moved on. They're living their life. It is your responsibility to heal the wounds that were inflicted upon you, whether they were by you or by someone else. I wanted to say one thing about that last wine example that we were saying, when you said, well, then, I have this mentality now when I walk into the room, I don't want to get close to this person so that I don't get them to spill anything. Well, how painful is it that that person is the person whose love you want the most, but you know that getting that love is dependent on you not getting close to them. There is no vulnerability involved, because your vulnerability is not welcome. Your vulnerability is pushing that cup to spill. And if that cup is abuse from the person who you love the most, and you're blaming yourself for pushing them, right? So it's not just that you are trying to protect yourself from that spillage happening, but you're also guarding yourself from real connection, because you can't come near that person, because that's the only thing that comes out of them. So I want people listening to really reflect on how much energy it takes to keep someone's love or respect or kindness or just being at peace with you. How much energy is it costing you? And if the energy that it's costing you is staying at a distance from them, but always wanting to be close to them, but being so afraid of getting close because you know what the consequence is, that's not love, that's not respect, that's not kindness. That's not what you want to be around. You need to be around people who, even if you get close to them and you push them in a way where it's, you're not intending to do it, but they spill something, it's love. It feels good. It doesn't feel like a punishment.
Wow, what's interesting is everything that we've just spoken about in these last 5 or 7 minutes is about validation. It's that we seek validation in a relationship. We seek the validation when we've broken up from the relationship. And so when I think about it, it really is all about how do we start to build that validation within ourselves, so that if I show up today and I say, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to read Nadra's poetry today because I really want to start connecting with my soul. Cool. Get up that morning, read your poetry, and now you've got validation with yourself that you said that you were going to do something that was going to help and heal you. And now, as you start to build that validation, you start to no longer look externally outside of yourself for it, because you can give it to yourself.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I love that you just really hammered home the validation piece, because I don't think we realize that that is a big thing of why we act the way we do, because we get the emotional satisfaction out of being validated. So that's a big part. It's like, don't beat yourself up over the fact that you get emotionally satisfaction out of that validation. Just recognize, going back to the recognition, that it doesn't serve you, doesn't serve your relationships. And that if you're able to then pivot, start developing it within yourself, then hopefully you actually start to improve your relationships, because you're not seeking it from them.
Because when you are able to give it to yourself, then you're not dependent on others for it. Then it feels good when you get it from others, but you're not just so desperate to get it from others because you're not able to give it to yourself. And it is hard. It is so hard to learn how to give yourself validation when you never knew how to do that. And probably the biggest reason we didn't know how to do that is we didn't even know that we had something about us that is unique and that deserves to shine and flourish on its own. We always saw ourselves as part of a puzzle. Just a little puzzle piece. And so as long as I can manage this person's emotions and this person's whatever and follow these rules, then I'm fine because I fit in here. But once you give yourself permission to actually look at yourself and, you know, your characteristics, your likes, your dislikes, your needs, your wants, and all of that, and tell yourself, I actually have the right to express those things and receive them. When you start thinking that way for yourself, that big puzzle might tell you, you no longer fit in here. And so that's when you become desperate, because you're like, I just want to be part of something, you know? And so you go back, but you are not part of something. The parts of you that have adapted to that something are part of something. And so when you make that decision to fully be yourself and, you know, embrace your edges and your sides and who you are as a person, then there's a process that comes after that where you will feel in certain moments like, I really need someone's love right now, to feel someone's like validation, someone telling me they are proud of me. And it's so lonely to go through that and not get it. And I used to go through it, and the most life-changing thing I started doing is when I would feel that way, like that desperation just to have someone's arms around me when no one was willing to put their arms around me, I would just close my eyes and put my arms around myself and just tell myself, like, you deserve this love that you are seeking right now. You deserve this validation that you are seeking right now. Just because no one is willing to give it to you, it doesn't mean that you need to change something about yourself so that they could be, oh, she deserves it now. No, just give it to yourself. Nothing is more powerful than giving yourself a hug. And it's not like you're going to live like this for the rest of your life, but it's going to help you remove from your life the people who put conditions on you being yourself, saying, my love is conditional on this, on you just hiding certain parts of you, of yourself. You're not going to live like this forever. Just like we said earlier, this is how things are now. Here's your next phrase or sentence. Things are not going to be the same way for the rest of my life. I'm going through a phase right now where I feel very lonely, but I'm not going to put myself in positions where I feel even more lonely just so that I'm not alone. Yeah.
That is really strong. You know, the phrase "this too shall pass" is like it's just one of my favorites. It's such a soft, beautiful way of reminding yourself you're not always going to feel like that. And that's really the big thing about emotions, is that in the moment they feel so real. They feel so heightened. They feel so like life will never, like my life will feel always like this. It just sometimes can feel hopeless, especially when you're on your knees. And so reminding yourself that, hey, look, you got this. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like it's this too shall pass, and this isn't always going to be permanent. And just right now, when you are going through it, what are the things you're going to do in order to self-soothe so that you can get back up? And one of the things actually that I've heard you talk about that is so damn powerful, because I think a lot of us do this, where we self-soothe by going, it's not about you. It's not personal. They did this because they're struggling. They did this because they've had childhood, you know, problems. Talk to me about that, because when I heard you rebut this whole thing, I was like, go natural. Like, so talk to me about how you see this, because it's so damn powerful. I've never heard anyone talk about it like this.
Like when people say it could be worse, right? Like be grateful for what you have, or what they did to you, whatever it is, hurt. You know that it hurt. So you don't need someone else giving you advice, telling you, well, like, oh, that person hurt you? No, like you're so much better than that. And you're just sitting there thinking, but it did hurt a lot. Like, I'm not sitting here needing somebody to speak to my ego and tell me you're so much bigger than this. I need someone to tell me that must have been so painful. That must have been so hard for you to go through. How can I help? How can I be there for you? So the worst thing you can do when you go through any kind of painful experience, the worst thing you can do for yourself is gaslight yourself out of your own pain. We always talk about people gaslighting us, but we gaslight ourselves all the time. And sometimes, and I want any person listening to this to know that I am saying this with the utmost compassion, because I understand that many times we gaslight ourselves of feeling a certain pain because we know that if I feel this pain, then I know what I'm going to have to do, and I'm not ready to do that. If I feel how painful these words that this person said to me were, I know I'm going to have to decide to leave, and I'm not ready to leave. So I would rather judge myself for accepting those words than judging myself for not leaving. Like, that's really, like, a person who's going through a tough time, who's thinking to themselves, oh, I'm just so used to this situation. I'm used to being treated this way. I'm used to this pain. I just brush it off. It doesn't affect me anymore. No, it affects you. But you're numbing yourself to it because you know if you really saw it clearly and felt that pain, you know what you're going to have to do. And if you're not ready, not just emotionally, you could be not financially ready. You could be, you could have no support system around you. You could have children that you're worried about. You could have so many things that would stop you from making this big, massive decision based on allowing yourself to feel how painful that pain was. So instead of doing that, you just tell yourself, it's just another day. You know, I've put up with this 200 times. I could just do it again, you know? So be compassionate with yourself instead of saying, I'm bigger than this pain. You know, I'm not going to let someone hurt me this way. Just say it hurts. There's nothing wrong with that.
That gaslighting piece is so strong. And I'd love to actually go over a couple of phrases, because this is also something that where people just like, oh my God, I do that to myself. People don't realize, right? Like, same with me. It's like sometimes you don't realize your own habits. So, you know, also like, so when you're justifying, let's say, right? It's like, oh, well, they've got a bad day. They're going through a bad period in their life. Things like that, where you're making reasons and excuses, exactly what you're saying. What other things have you even maybe even said to yourself where you're like, now you can recognize, oh, that was a massive sign that I was gaslighting myself?
So anytime I find myself putting someone else's reality ahead of mine, I know I'm gaslighting myself. And I learned this in therapy, and it's so powerful. When I step out of my story to be in yours, that's where I draw the red line. I need to come back to my story. So I can see your story. I can see the excuses. I can see your upbringing. I can see what would have pushed you to do or say something. But I don't need to leave myself and my story and my upbringing and my intentions and what I did and what I said just so that we can just live in your story. I need to stay in mine. And that's where that boundary needs to be drawn. Yes, I can understand you reacted that way because you were abused when you were a child. I can understand that. But I'm not going to tell you that you hurting me is okay just because I want to live in that excuse. That is wrong and this is wrong. Those two things can be wrong. But just because you don't want to deal with that pain and dissect it and heal from it and put it behind you, and instead of actually doing that, you are spilling your pain on me. So instead of me giving you that, no, you need to go heal that pain, because I also don't deserve that pain to be spilled on me. You know, I've done this with friends, I've done this with partners, I've done this with family, where I just got to a point where it's honestly, Lisa, it's one of those like times where, you know, when you sit there and you're staring into space and you just lose track of everything around you, and you're just having a moment of clarity where you look back at a certain memory where you were spoken to a certain way, and then later, like, everybody excused it by saying, well, that's just how he is, you know? And everybody just but everybody adapts to that one person's how they are, you know? And you're just sitting there thinking back to that moment and you think, wow, like that, the way he spoke to me was so wrong. And so, but in that moment, I didn't even give myself the right to be hurt, because everybody said, well, that's just how he is, so live with it, right?
I didn't give myself the right to be hurt.
Exactly. Because no one else around me gave me the right to be hurt. It was just, well, he did, again, don't take it personally. That's just who he is. He's always been like that. Just adapt to it with it and live with it. But can you imagine if I, in that moment, just spoke up and said, you shouldn't have spoken to me in that way? This is where the compassion piece needs to come in for anybody listening. Because in that moment, it wouldn't have been safe for me to speak up and say, that was wrong of you to do that, because that person would have escalated and you don't know what he would have done, right? So you need to, again, when you go back to your past self who was sitting there and didn't give themselves permission to heal the pain and was just in protection mode, like, at least it wasn't worse, you know? You remind yourself, I didn't do that because I was weak. I did that because I was protecting myself from something worse. But when you get that moment of clarity where you're like, that hurt, and you start feeling what it feels like in your body to be told something that's like not you, and you start feeling the tension and like you really just want to fight for yourself. That's you releasing pain. That's you releasing trauma. That's how you heal. Because you've allowed, this is another thing I learned in therapy, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody on your show talk about this, but when you have a certain trauma response trapped in your body in a moment like that, where you just didn't give yourself the right to feel the pain because you were in protection mode, that response gets trapped in your body. And so later, when you think back to that time and feel it in your body, you're allowing your body to finish the cycle of trauma and release it, instead of being stuck there. And then every time someone speaks to you that way, you go into that protection. Once you release it, now you're able to do differently. When someone else speaks to you that way, you don't get stuck in that protective role. You say, that was wrong, and I'm leaving. I'm not keeping myself in this environment. So for any person who is now realizing they've been gaslighting themselves out of their own pain for so long, again, the answer is, don't sit there and say, oh, how could I have done this to myself? Like, I'm the one who let myself down. No, many people let you down. Yes, you abandoned yourself, but you were doing it to protect yourself. Stop taking away from how painful the pain they threw your way was by saying, well, if I just protected myself better, right? Yeah. Just be compassionate with yourself. You were doing the best you could.
God, that is so beautiful. And as we start to talk about how we start to get back up, how we really start to heal old past wounds, things that we've gone through, I've heard you talk about emotional debt.
Yes.
Because all of this you keep saying, right? Make sure that you validate your emotions. You go back and you step back into your story. We should never
Yes.
dismiss what we're doing. But there's also the other side of it where we've accumulated so much emotional debt that we start to react in ways that may not actually align with how we truly feel, but it's all based on the debt that we've had in the past.
The simplest example I can give you is with resentment. When you have so much resentment towards someone and the littlest thing that they do, you just pick on them for it. It's not because of that little thing that they did. It's because they've done this and this and this and this, and it went unresolved over time. And now that you're bringing up this little tiny issue, which to you is sitting on top of all of these unresolved issues, it might come across to the world around you as, where's that coming from? Like, you are really overreacting. But it's because past issues and resentments were not resolved. And so again, the reason we accumulate them over time is we're trying to protect ourselves. The person that we're experiencing this with doesn't want to resolve anything, and we would rather keep our relationship with them than have this issue be just something that we bring up every single day. So I've done this, for example, with a friend of mine where she had a certain habit of really getting upset with me every time I didn't answer the phone. And it wasn't that I wasn't answering the phone because I didn't want to, which would have been a completely fine, right? But again, I'm going back to my people-pleasing days. And she would become very passive-aggressive with me in our next interactions when, a couple days went by when I didn't answer her call. Keep in mind, I was working full-time, writing full-time, in school full-time. So I had a lot going on. And my priorities in my life, yes, my friends are important, but for me, family, work, school, like the things I immediately need to do for myself, those are way more important than being there at a person's demand. So And she never really confronted me about it, but she would make passive-aggressive comments about it. And then finally she confronted me about it. And I was so shocked. Like, in the way she spoke to me, that was the shocking part. The way she spoke to me made me feel like I was a bad person. Like I was intentionally letting my friend down. Like I was intentionally trying to hurt her. And none of that was true. And it's because many experiences had gone by where she was not bringing things up. She was being passive aggressive, and then I was accumulating my own things because I couldn't just say to her like, hey, like you've been really passive aggressive, because I was also afraid of that confrontation. So we're both carrying that emotional debt that's not really dealt with. And then, because one time I didn't answer her call or didn't answer a text or didn't leave an emoji at the end of my text, she just blew up. But she wasn't just blowing up because of that. And then same thing with me. When she spoke to me that way, I had also accumulated all these times that were unresolved, that she was being really passive aggressive with me over text or calls, or just would make like comments that were intended to make me feel like I only think of myself. And I would just look at them and think, what is up with her? So that's a simple example where you can look at other experiences in your life that aren't as simple, that could have to do with family or with a relationship that you're in, where over time you've just allowed a series of events and experiences to go unresolved, either because you were afraid of bringing them up or because the person that you were trying to resolve them with wasn't willing to resolve them, and you chose being with them over the resolution, right? And over time that accumulates, and then you only have so much that you can carry. Let's say this is how much you can carry. You get to the top of that one little tiny thing that happens, and it just all blows up, and it's not pretty. It doesn't mean that like, oh, now that it blew up, then I don't have to deal with all of this. No, now you have to deal with all of this. Because let's say one of those experiences was being spoken to with unkind words. And then another one of those experiences was being told that something that happened didn't actually happen. So gaslighting. Let's say another one of those experiences was this person, for example, telling you, why would you ask that question to someone? And in that moment, you may have taken a step back thinking, I want to keep the peace with this person that I'm with, so maybe I should just not ask these questions. But then later, when you go back to it in your mind, you think, wait a minute, what was so wrong about that? But then you don't get it resolved, right? Then there's another one, and another one, another one. And then one day that person, you're walking out the door and they tell you, that color, like, why would you choose something like that? And then you'll look at them and just start screaming. And it's because of all of this, not because of, why would you wear green today?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's the iceberg, right? It's the thing that you see on top versus everything that's underneath. And as you were talking, it's interesting because there's really two elements to this, right? It's your own emotional debt that you bring to the table, and then it's the other person's emotional debt that they bring to the table. So it's easier for me personally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, to identify someone else's emotional debt. So when someone acts completely either out of character or irrational, I used to be like, oh my God, it's all about me. I don't anymore in my own growth. Now the thing that I do is, because I love filmmaking, I always kind of relate it to that. So I'm like, okay, imagine I was writing a screenplay and all of a sudden this person acts like they're acting. What would have to be true for them to be so crazily mad, angry, whatever, over me saying, hey, do you mind moving your shoes, right? Like, once I start going, what would have to be true in the screenplay? It's exactly what you said. It's all the stuff that's actually happened before this page. It's all the problems that they've had leading up to this one moment. That actually is easier for me versus my own acknowledgement that I've got the emotional debt, because again, feelings feel very real. So in that moment where you really are bloody upset because someone said they didn't like you in green, like, it feels really real.
Yeah.
How do you start to acknowledge, oh, okay, this is emotional debt right now, the way that I'm responding, and then what are those steps that you can start to calm down, if you will, and then potentially next time start paying off the debt.
Yes. As you were saying, like, when two people come together and they have their own emotional debts, I'm like, can people sign prenups for that?
Exactly, yeah.
Just say, like, whatever you had in the past, you keep.
Love it.
Right? So for me, the number one thing is awareness, right? The decision to become aware that maybe you're not always right. Like, maybe the way you're reacting emotionally to something is valid to you, but it could be an overreach in a certain moment based on what somebody else said. Like, it could really not be their intention at all, what you experienced internally. So when you go through enough of that in your life, and the people who carry a lot of emotional debt that's unresolved, they know that they have a lot going on. And you'll know because you'll see them go crazy over something that you just think to yourself, it was literally just a mug. Like, that was put this way, but you think it should have been put this way. So as an outsider, you see that, but they also know that. But it's telling yourself, maybe there's something about me that needs to change so that I'm not constantly reacting to the world around me. Maybe there's something about me that needs to change where I don't start trying to control the littlest, tiniest things because I'm sitting on a time bomb of unresolved things, right? So for me, where that process began was because I'm an empath and I carry people's emotions. You're like me. And if someone looks at me a way that they hadn't looked at me before, I'll notice it. If somebody changed the inflection in their voice, I'll notice it and I'll immediately think, oh, they don't like me anymore, or they're feeling a certain way, and I would carry so much of that, and in turn I would try to like reverse it in some way or make up for it so that I don't see that anymore or hear that anymore. And so for me, once I became aware that so much of what I do is a reflection of the world around me. I made the conscious decision to stop being a reflection of the world around me and start being myself and seeing how the world around me changes or shifts. So now I'm not reacting, because a reaction is very immediate. Now I'm responding. So now you tell me something, right? And I take some time to think about it before I say what I'm going to say. So the time that I take will include that initial reaction that could be, how could you say something like this to me? How could you, knowing everything I've been through, how could you might know that I'm sensitive to being excluded. I'm very sensitive to being excluded. And say today I came over and let's say there were 4 other people around here and you gave them all a gift and gave me a slightly different gift. So old me would have immediately thought, so she doesn't think I deserve a gift like they do. And I would go back to my childhood experiences where with my cousins, their parents would get them the best of the best, and then they would give me whatever was left over.
And you were living with them at a time.
Yes, and I was living with them at the time, and that really hurt. That really shaped for me the belief that I don't deserve to be prioritized, that I get leftovers, leftovers as in whatever everybody else doesn't want or everybody else doesn't see as cool. Even if it was clothes that didn't fit me, I will get whatever's left over. So now as an adult, if I haven't dealt with that, you exclude me in the slightest bit, and my initial reaction is going to be, she doesn't think I deserve a gift like them. And I go back to that little child. And then I might treat you differently as a result of that. When really, it could have been that you didn't know I was coming until 2 days ago and you bought those 4 other gifts months ago. And so...
Or I bought you a special gift because I knew you actually wouldn't like what I got everyone else. And now I'm doing something especially for you because I'm thinking of you.
Yes, very hypothetical situation that we made very...
But it is, right? It's those little things that fucking derail us, girl. It takes us from going, oh my God, Lisa was so kind and thought of getting this very special gift for me, to then the interpretation being, wow, I can't believe she doesn't like me, she doesn't care about me, she doesn't value me as much as she does the other people.
Yes.
It's fucking night and day, but this is exactly it. This is exactly what, and sorry I'm swearing a lot, this is when I've been very aggressive, right? These are the moments that as women, we start to get inwards, we start to then develop a certain mindset that then doesn't serve us or empower us.
Yes, absolutely. So what can I do as somebody who's carrying all of that emotional debt for years? I can start going back to that young me, story by story, and sit with her and tell her that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. I was telling my therapist a story last week. I might cry when I tell this, because she asked me, she's like, what are you going to do for yourself this week? And I said, you know what? Maybe I'll buy myself a bike. And she started clapping and she's like, I can't wait for the day that you tell me that you did. And it's because of this story. So when I was younger and I was staying with my cousins, it was during the summertime, and even when I wasn't staying with them full time, I was spending so much time there. Like we were like brothers and sisters, and my mom was always there. And so they all got bikes. Like one day my uncle came and he had bought them all bikes and I didn't get one. And I didn't, as a child who was forced to mature mentally and emotionally very young, and just look at myself as an adult who understands, like, not everybody gets everything. Like I was pushed to think that way when I was so young, as like a mature adult who can't say, no, I want toys and I want this and I want that. So I remember being very sad, but also thinking that's just how it is. And then later, a few days later, my cousin was like, oh, you can ride on my bike if you want, like fine. So I went I sat on it, and I had never been on a bike. No one taught me. And so I fell, and they all started laughing at me. And I've never been on a bike since that day because of how, like, it was, and it was also the accumulation of all those experiences of feeling like I don't deserve those things. And then even if I do, I'm going to be made fun of, and so I didn't. And so now, if I didn't try to resolve those things and do the things for myself that I wish the adults around me did when I was younger, if I don't do that for myself, I'm going to continue looking at every person who doesn't include me. And it's not like it's wrong to not be included. As an adult, you can get your own things. You don't need, to constantly have someone just say, I'm going to include you in this. Or if I don't go back to those earlier stories and resolve them and give myself at that time what she needed and change those beliefs for her, from you don't deserve good things to you do deserve good things, you don't deserve unconditional love to you do deserve unconditional love, from you deserve to be with someone who prioritizes you and your heart and your soul and your emotional well-being. I have to change that for myself. No one can change it for me. A relationship might change it for me by showing me, like, if this person is giving me all the things that I needed. But a person can spill love and shower you with gifts and prioritize you all the time. If you don't believe that about yourself, it doesn't change you at your core. And as soon as that person is gone, you'll go back to being that person who didn't think she deserved any of those things. So yeah, that's one of the ways I'm meeting my own needs. That's one of the ways I'm resolving my own emotional debt that I accumulated for no fault of my own. Mm-hmm. Like you started accumulating those things as far back as you can remember. And yes, I know you want that parent of yours or that aunt or uncle to come, or cousins to come and tell you, we shouldn't have done that. But you don't get it all the time. You need to give it to yourself. You don't need them to tell you, yeah, I knew I should have gotten you a bike too. You don't need them to tell you that. You know that. So you have to let go of your need to get their validation that what happened in the past was wrong. And event by event, you start taking that emotional debt that's like way up here. And then what you're doing is you're creating space for new love and positivity and connection, and then you start walking around on a base of that instead of on a base of all this emotional debt that's just, it's waiting to explode.
I love it so much. Oh my God. So, because everything we talk really comes full circle when you think about the validation and the worth piece, right? Mm-hmm. Because you even said, like, I could wait for someone else to buy me a bike, but now you're doing the same thing. You're waiting to be validated by somebody else. You're waiting for someone else to say, oh, you're worthy of a bike now. You weren't at 9, but now as an adult, you've paid your dues.
Yes.
But in just taking the action, in not waiting, there is, I'm going to be honest, I assume there is a little bit of sadness to it. Mm. But I think that's the natural course of nature when it comes to emotions.
Absolutely.
So just embracing, it's a little, yes, I do wish actually someone had actually just bought me the bike.
Yeah.
But the fact that I recognize I can't wait for it because now I'm repeating the cycle that I did as a child. Mm-hmm. And now to your point of now you're starting to pay the emotional debt, you're starting to get out of it by unwiring these thoughts and these emotional debts that you have been stuck in the past.
Yes, and it's not just about the bike. Like, you could see a scene like this in a movie where it could really hit you differently if you just add the sad music in the background, right?
Slow motion, punch-ins.
Yes, because someone might listen to a story where, a little girl was with her cousins and their parents bought them bikes and she didn't get one, and that person might think, well, yeah, that's fine. Like, they might not see it as, but the way it impacted me at that time, and Lisa, I can remember the exact spot I fell off that bike and where they were laughing at me. The impact it left me with is not for anybody else to say, oh, that was really sad. How did you go? It's for me to validate for myself how awful that was and decide to do something about it, where again, it's not about getting myself a bike, it's about meeting my need in that moment and telling myself the words I wish I heard at that time, which are, you are as important as them, therefore I will get you a bike just like I got them. That was it.
Yeah.
It's the importance part, the prioritization. And I would have loved it if somebody in my adult years got me a bike, but it's going to be so much more beautiful that I'm doing that for myself, right?
And what I absolutely love about this story is it gives very people listening right now and watching very concrete steps. It really is, guys, what is that need that you used to have as a child? Identify, acknowledge it. You've said multiple times in this interview, right? Acknowledge that need. And now start to think, how can you start to slowly, it's never going to happen overnight. It may take a year, it may take 5 years. Don't beat yourself up that it's going to take a long time, right? Just know, I've acknowledged it. And now I care about myself so much, going back to priorities, right? I prioritize on myself now to now recognize I need to be giving myself this need. And then identify how you do that over time. And it can be anything from a bike, right? That is very like, I can pay for this and buy it because I've saved up. Or just from an emotional need where you're like, I don't feel good enough to go to X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, how do you start to feel good enough? Okay, well, it takes this one little stepping stone. Waking up in the morning, prioritizing you instead of somebody else. Like, it takes these little stepping stones, but it all starts with how you so eloquently put it is, what was that need you had as a child?
Yes.
And then go from there.
And that's when what's going to take you, this comes full circle, to going from knowing to doing. By giving yourself permission to understand that the reason you haven't started acting on what you know is that for X number of years, going back to all those stories, you weren't acting based on this knowledge. And so these experiences have the right to be validated by you and acknowledged by you as they are the reason that you came to this knowledge in the first place. Like, they are the reason that you had to come to a place where you have acquired all this knowledge on what you need to change in your life. So you're not going to look at all those experiences and say, that was bad, I'm just never going to go back to it. No, that was bad, but why? What did it feel like in your body? What message did it tell you about yourself? Because you need to change those things. If I had continued operating as the girl who believed she only deserved leftovers, when my knowledge tells me you deserve so much more, but I'm continuing to act this way without going back to understand, oh, in this moment, I felt this way because an adult in my life made the wrong decision. There you go. There's a light bulb moment for me that's going to help me work on the knowledge that I now have.
Oh my God, so true, so good. And then that final piece that I really want to hammer home, in you saying I'm going to buy a bike for myself, is the last piece to the puzzle that not only says, hey, I'm going to fill in my own needs that I want, but there is that part of like, we're so, as people pleasers, we're so inclined to do things for other people. And I heard you even say a story, you saw something for your nephew or something and you were like, oh my God, of course I'll buy this. You didn't look at the price, you didn't look at the, right? Like, it was just like, of course, I knew how it would make him feel and it was a no-brainer. But we never do that for ourselves. When it's something that we want, we justify, maybe we shouldn't do it.
Sometimes it's literally a $5 thing. And I'm like, do I really need it? But if it's for someone I love, it's like $1,000 and I don't even think about it. Just,
Yes, and what I so love about you saying, I'm going to buy the bike for myself, is now also pivoting that part of us that will absolutely show up for other people, but not ourselves. This last piece of the puzzle is, I'm going to fill in my own needs and I'm going to show up for myself first. I'm going to spend the money on myself. I never used to. That idea is now really solidifying within you that I'm freaking worthy, that I show up for myself. And girl, that is so damn powerful. So when you get in the bike,
I'm going to get it this week. I'm going to go bike shopping. And even if I buy it and even if it sits there for a year before I sit on it for the first time and decide to teach myself, it's going to change something inside of me. And I just know it because meeting my own needs has been riddled with feeling selfish and feeling like I'm someone who's ungrateful for everything good that has gone on in my life, and like, why? Like, are you just whining about your childhood? Are you just, stop making that your life story? Like, you get that kind of messaging when you start speaking up for yourself. And then you just have to recognize that that's a continuation of the pattern you fell into in the past. And yes, Lisa, I'm going to meet my needs for a certain period of time, but it doesn't mean that for the rest of my life there will be no person who is going to look at a story like that and say, let's go bike shopping. Like, you're going to get that, but don't depend on someone else to meet your needs. Once you get to a point where you can meet those needs for yourself and not be so desperate for someone else to meet them for you, then the only people who will walk into your life, who will stay in your life, are those who aren't threatened by your ability to self-fulfill. And they will just add instead of chipping away at you by making you dependent on them for love and for all of these things. Like, don't go back to that pattern in your adulthood that started in your childhood just because that's what feels safe in your body. And I want to say a really powerful thing. Sometimes what feels safe in your body, as in what doesn't make your body just want this whole thing to go away, like kind of like when you do whatever it takes to keep the peace with someone, that might feel like safety because you've protected yourself from something. That definition of safety goes against the definition of safety that now as an adult you need to be going for. You're not going for safety that's in opposition to something you need to protect yourself from. You're going for safety that's open. You walk towards something or someone and you feel safe being yourself instead of feeling safe when you close up. Like, you need to break that.
That's such a mic drop. We're going to have to do a round 2 because holy smokes. That was so beautiful. Guys,
Thank you.
In fact, before we get to where people can find you, we're going to do a round 2. Click that notification button right now to be the first to watch our freaking round 2 because, dude, we've got to go deep in that.
Yes.
So until then, where can people find you and everything you're doing?
They can find me on every platform for social media. It's just at Nejwa Zabian.
Click here right now to learn the 7 ways to spot manipulation and gaslighting.
When we are truly dealing with a manipulation strategy is that we tend to get gaslit into believing that what we're saying happened didn't happen. And all of a sudden you go from being on cloud 9